Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I was a kid, probably between 8 and 11, I used to think my older sister was the coolest person on the planet. She was 7 years older than me, which meant she could drive, had a curfew, cursed when our parents weren't around, and smoked. She was the kind of tough that wasn't loud or dramatic, just quiet and unbothered. Our parents worked late a lot back then, so she ended up watching me most evenings. We lived in a small house on the edge of a cul-de-sac, in a neighborhood that felt safe enough at the time. Not the kind of place where people locked their doors in the daytime. You knew your neighbors, waved to them. It was one of those quiet, in-between places, not quite country, not quite suburb, with just enough trees and space between houses to feel isolated at night. The carport on our house faced the street directly. It was attached to the side of the house, just open air with a roof overhead. That's where my sister would go to smoke, because our parents made it clear she wasn't allowed to do it indoors. I'd always follow her out there, half out of boredom, half because I wanted to hang out with her. She'd usually lean against the support beam or sit on the old paint-peeling bench while I messed around with a stick or rolled a tennis ball across the cracked concrete. Sometimes I'd ride my scooter in circles or just sit on the edge, swinging my legs and asking questions she mostly ignored. It became a routine. She'd light up. I'd hang around her like an annoying little brother does. Most nights were uneventful. Quiet. Just the sound of distant dogs barking or a neighbor mowing their lawn while the sky dimmed from orange to gray. I remember the first time we noticed the white SUV. She was mid-smoke, eyes off somewhere like always, when she stopped and squinted. I followed her gaze and saw it, parked at the end of our driveway. Not in the driveway, just beyond it on the street. It wasn't facing us directly, but angled just enough that it felt like the front windshield was watching our house. It was a white SUV. I remember the boxy shape, kind of squarish with a sloped back and a roof rack. Later, my dad called it a mid-90s Bravada or something like that. At the time, I just thought it looked plain and boring. What stuck out to me more were the windows. They were black, so dark that even in daylight, you couldn't see a thing through them. The kind of tint that looked illegal. The entire side facing us was like a mirror of shadows. No movement, no hint of the driver. Just stillness. It stayed there until she finished her smoke. Then when she flicked her cigarette out and went inside, the SUV slowly rolled forward, real slow, and then turned the corner. I remember watching it from the living room window. I saw it drive to the church parking lot at the end of our street and just park again, facing the house. That happened a few more times that week. Always when my sister went out for a cigarette. It would show up, sit at the end of the drive, then slink away when she left. It didn't seem like it was there for anything else. It didn't go to the church. No one got out. It didn't deliver anything. It would just arrive, sit, and leave. At first, we joked about it. Called it the creeper car. My sister shrugged it off like she did everything. She didn't scare easy, or at least she didn't show it. She told me not to worry about it, said people park weird all the time. But it didn't feel right. Even at that age, I could sense the wrongness in it. There was no reason for it to be there. Not that often, not like that. One night, I stayed inside while she went out. I peeked through the blinds in the living room, and sure enough, the SUV pulled up like clockwork. Just far enough to look like it wasn't doing anything, but close enough to be watching. I remember crouching behind the couch when it happened, afraid that whoever was in there could see me through the windows. The next night, same thing. This time, she noticed it sooner. She didn't say anything, just looked at it for a long time, smoke curling from her fingers, then stubbed out her cigarette early and walked back in. That night she told our dad. Our dad was a sheriff's deputy at the time. A big guy, not the friendly type. He didn't yell often, but when he did, you listened. I remember watching him quietly while my sister talked to him in the kitchen. His face went hard and serious, and the next night, 2 patrol cars circled the neighborhood. They parked nearby, tried to catch the SUV, but it never came. Not that night, not the one after. Weeks went by. Nothing. Then months. Eventually we stopped talking about it. The school year started back up, and life sort of resumed its rhythm. It felt like a weird memory, like something from a movie or a dream you forget once you wake up. Then about 9 months later, it returned. Same SUV. Same spot at the end of the drive. Tinted windows, roof rack, that same stillness. My sister saw it before I did. She was already halfway through her smoke when she went stiff and muttered something under her breath. She didn't call for our dad this time. He wasn't home. Neither was Mom. It was just us again, like the old days. She stared at it a long time. Then she put her cigarette out on the pavement and stood up straighter, kind of squared her shoulders. I knew that look. It meant she was about to do something bold. She told me to stay in the carport. Then she started walking down the driveway. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just stood there watching her get smaller and smaller as she made her way toward the road. The SUV didn't move, didn't even twitch, just sat there like it always did. She got about halfway down when she suddenly stopped. Just stopped mid-stride, her arms stiff at her sides. She stood like that for what felt like forever. Then she turned around, walked briskly back up the driveway, past me, and into the house. She never explained it fully that night, but later, she told Dad that something came over her. She said she felt it deep in her chest, a kind of pressure, like she was being watched not with curiosity, but with intent. She said her body locked up, that the closer she got, the more certain she became that something terrible was going to happen if she kept going, like stepping into a trap. She said she never felt fear like that before or since. A few days later, the SUV stopped coming again. Time passed, and we almost forgot about it. Then one night, months later again, it came back. This time, everything was different. The family car was in the shop. We were stuck at home all evening. I remember we had pizza delivered, and everyone was kind of cranky because my mom was late getting off work, and my dad hated spending money on food he didn't cook. My sister went out for a smoke like always, and I followed. I was leaning against one of the carport posts when she suddenly tensed and pointed toward the road. I looked, and sure enough, the SUV was there again. Same one. No mistake. She didn't hesitate this time. She told me to go inside and tell Dad. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was urgent. I remember bolting through the house, yelling for him, and before I even finished the sentence, he was already up, grabbing his gun from the locked drawer. He didn't run, but he walked fast. Really fast. Steady, controlled, like he already knew what he was going to do. I followed behind him just far enough to see, but not to get in the way. I remember his silhouette in the dark, his broad shoulders, the gun down at his side but not raised. He walked all the way to the bottom of the driveway. The SUV waited. Then it floored it. Tires squealed, rubber burned, and the thing shot off like a rocket. It peeled around the corner and tore onto the nearby highway, disappearing into the night like it was never there. My dad stood there a while, watching where it vanished. When he came back inside, he was pissed. Not scared, angry. Said the license plate was covered in duct tape. Said whoever that was knew what they were doing. Said they'd been careful. We never saw that SUV again after that night. Not once. Not in our neighborhood, not at the church lot, not anywhere. It was like it vanished from the earth. My sister still talks about it like it's a weird footnote from her youth. She shrugs it off now, says it was probably just some creep. But I know it stuck with her more than she lets on. I can see it in the way she double-checks the locks when she visits our parents, in how she watches the street before stepping outside for air. And for me, even decades later, I still get this cold, crawling feeling when I see an SUV that looks even remotely like that one, even though I know it's not the same, even though I tell myself it was probably nothing. But there's something about the stillness of it, the way it watched, the fact that it kept coming back, over and over again, waiting for what we'll never know. All I know is, whoever was in that SUV wasn't just bored. They weren't just lost. They were watching my sister. They were planning something. And something, maybe her instincts, maybe luck, maybe just timing, stopped it from happening. Sometimes, the scariest stories don't need monsters or ghosts. Sometimes, it's just the quiet presence of a stranger with a dark window, a covered plate, and a reason you'll never understand. When I was a kid, the one thing I dreaded more than anything else in the world was carrying my dirty clothes down to the basement. It wasn't that I hated chores. I mean, what kid likes chores? But this wasn't that. This was different. This was fear, pure, primal, bone-deep fear. Our basement wasn't fully finished like some of my friends' houses. The side where the laundry machines were, It was just concrete floors, wooden beams in the ceiling, exposed wires and pipes, and the worst part, the far corner that never seemed to get light, no matter how bright the bulb in the middle of the ceiling was. Even during the day, with sunlight trying to trickle through the narrow horizontal windows just under the ceiling line, it always felt dim. And it always felt cold, like the air had been trapped there for years, stale and unmoving. My mom insisted I carry my own laundry down every Saturday. I used to beg her to come with me, even when I was way too old to be doing that. She thought I was being lazy, dramatic. Maybe I was a little. But what I never told her was that by the time I was 8 or 9, I'd been having nightmares about that basement for years. Not just bad dreams, reoccurring ones. The kind that come back again and again, slowly building up in detail until they feel more real than your own memories. One of them stood out more than the rest. I would be alone in the house. That part was normal. I was a quiet kid, used to solitude. But in the dream, I always realized at some point that it was almost time. I didn't know what time meant exactly. Not a clock time. It wasn't like 3 o'clock or midnight or anything like that. It was more like a feeling, a thick tension crawling into the air, a shift in the silence, a pressure that built in my chest. I could feel it coming the way animals must feel a storm before it hits. It always came slow, creeping. In the dream, I would try to hide under the kitchen table. The door to the basement was in the kitchen. That part was real. I would crawl underneath, folding myself up as tight as I could, heart pounding in my ears. And then the door to the basement would open. I never saw his face. Just the legs. A man's legs, heavy boots, dark jeans, standing at the threshold, never making a sound. I always knew he could see me, though. I could feel it. Like he stood there because he wanted me to sit in that fear, shaking and trying not to breathe, hoping if I just stayed quiet enough, I could survive. But I always knew deep down he was just waiting, enjoying it. Other dreams were worse. Dreams where I'd be walking down the basement steps. Sometimes I knew I was dreaming. I could feel it, but I couldn't stop walking. Step after step, even as the shadows grew thicker, heavier. At the bottom, when my foot left the last step, everything would go black. Not dim, not dark, pitch black, like someone dropped a curtain over the world. And then something would grab me. I could never describe it. I could never even think about it for long after I woke up. I would come to, sweating, my chest aching like I'd been screaming, but couldn't make a sound. The fear was so real it lingered with me for hours, sometimes days. Sometimes I'd smell the dust of the basement randomly, or feel a chill, and it would come flooding back. It got so bad that just being told to bring my clothes down would ruin my day. I'd carry the laundry basket with stiff arms, every creak of the wooden stairs behind me making my spine lock up. I always rushed, dumped the clothes in a pile, and sprinted back up the stairs without looking back. I had this rule, never look back. If something was behind me, I didn't want to know. I convinced myself it was better not to know, that maybe ignorance would save me. When I was maybe 11 or 12, I started trying to be braver. I hated how much fear had a grip on me. I hated that I couldn't even handle a simple chore without having to psych myself up like I was walking into battle. But bravery doesn't mean the fear goes away. It just means you try to function through it. There was this one day I remember more than the others. It was summer. I was home alone, which was normal for weekends. My mom had gone grocery shopping. I was in the living room, and I remember the sunlight filtering in through the windows. It was a bright day, not a single cloud. The kind of day you should feel safe in. But then she left, and I realized I hadn't taken my clothes down yet. The moment I thought about the basement, I felt it. That pressure. Like the temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Like the light wasn't as bright anymore. I told myself I was being stupid. I kept repeating that. It's just a basement. You've been down there 1,000 times. It's your own house. Nothing is going to happen. But my brain didn't believe it. My dog was with me. She was a mutt, part retriever, part who knows what. She followed me everywhere, always loyal, always happy. It made me feel better to know she was there. I got the idea that if I brought her down with me, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe she'd bark or growl if something weird was happening. Dogs sense stuff like that, right? So I called her over, grabbed my basket of dirty clothes, and made my way to the kitchen. I paused in front of the basement door, hand on the knob. It wasn't locked, never had been, but the moment my fingers wrapped around the cold metal, my skin broke out in goosebumps. Still, I pushed it open. Daylight flooded down the stairs. I could see the concrete floor clearly. The laundry machines sat where they always did, silent and unmoving. Nothing looked out of place. My dog trotted in front of me, tail wagging, nails clacking on the steps as she led the way. That helped. I followed her, step by step, down into the unfinished side of the basement. Everything was quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator upstairs and the soft scuff of my socks on the wood. The scent of dust, detergent, and concrete filled my nose. I walked to the usual spot and dropped the clothes on the pile. It was easy, normal. I even let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My dog sniffed around, unbothered. I gave her a quick pat on the head, turned, and started back toward the stairs. Like always, I didn't walk. I ran. It wasn't a panic run. More like a sprint powered by the thought of relief. Just get up the stairs and you're safe. I always felt like if I could get through that last step into the kitchen, some invisible danger would dissolve. I was halfway up when it happened. Behind me, no warning, this explosive noise erupted. A deep, loud, scrambling thud. Not just a noise, a presence. Something heavy was charging up the stairs behind me. I didn't see it. I didn't need to. I could feel it in my bones. The steps shook. The sound of claws or fingers or something not quite human scraping against the wooden stairs filled the air. My body stopped working. My mind didn't even form words. It was like the fear took over completely. I collapsed, literally dropped to my knees, and rolled into a fetal position on the steps. I didn't even try to crawl. I didn't scream again. I'd already screamed once, the second it started. After that, it was just a flood of terror crashing over my head. All those years of nightmares, all those times I dreamed of being grabbed, pulled down, dragged into that blackness, came rushing back at once. This was it. It was real. I hadn't been imagining it. The man, the dreams, the darkness, he was coming for me now. I had let my guard down, brought myself into the open. I remember squeezing my eyes shut, face pressed into my own knees. My arms were wrapped around my head. I thought maybe if I made myself small enough, I'd be invisible. Maybe it would pass over me. Or maybe I'd feel the hands wrap around me, and that would be the end. Either way, I didn't move. I couldn't. Then I felt a warm tongue on my face. I blinked, confused, body still frozen. Another lick, and then a soft, excited bark. My dog. She had raced up the stairs after me, her nails creating the sounds, her paws pounding the steps. She thought we were playing. A fun game. That was it. I broke. Laughter and tears hit me at the same time. My legs were jelly, but I managed to sit up. My hands were shaking like crazy. My dog kept licking my face, tail wagging, proud of herself for winning the race. I didn't go back down to the basement for a long time after that. But the truth is, that day didn't fix anything. I wasn't suddenly cured of my fear. In fact, it did the opposite. Because for just a second, for one frozen, horrifying moment, my nightmare had become real. And if it could happen once, even by mistake, then it meant that moment could exist. That the dreams weren't just dreams. That a part of my mind knew what it felt like to face something you couldn't see, couldn't explain, but were certain meant to do you harm. Even now, as an adult, I think about that basement. My parents eventually sold the house, and I never told anyone what happened that day. But I still remember the way my body shut down, the way the stairs creaked under invisible weight, the way the light didn't quite touch the farthest corners. Sometimes, I have dreams about it again. Not exactly like before. There's no man at the door now, no cold hand grabbing me from the dark. But I still see that basement. The air is still heavy. The silence is still too quiet. And somewhere, down in the shadows, I know something is still waiting. Watching. Not chasing. Just waiting. And that's somehow worse. When I think back to that day, I can still feel the sun on my arms, smell the dry summer grass, and hear the way the wind rustled through the trees at the edge of the yard. It was just an ordinary afternoon. My sister and I were outside, running around the yard, kicking up dust and pretending the worn, crumbling gravestones at the back of the property were part of some kind of adventure game. That old cemetery had always been a strange but normal part of our lives. It sat behind the house like a silent, rotting memory, tucked away by trees and shadow. We'd grown up with it. The house itself had been built in the 1800s, and the cemetery behind it mostly held children. Tiny markers with faded names and dates etched into them, a lot of them lost to sickness back, when even a fever could kill. People around town whispered about it, called it haunted, said there were strange sounds at night or cold spots in the grass. But to us, it was just part of home. We never thought much about the gravestones anymore. Sometimes local history buffs or weird tourists would walk by, stopping at the fence to take pictures or read the dates. Our mom said it happened because the house had been mentioned in a couple of books about the town's past, and people were drawn to old places like ours. The town was small, quiet, the kind of place people drove through without stopping unless they had a reason. And that old graveyard was a reason for a few. That day was no different at first. I remember we were playing tag. My sister, who was 2 years younger than me, was fast, and she could twist and dodge like no one I knew. She was wearing this bright purple shirt with flowers on it, and her hair was tied up in a messy ponytail, bouncing as she ran ahead of me. The sun was high, and the heat shimmered off the pavement that cut down the road in front of our house. That road wasn't busy, but we were used to seeing a few cars or people here and there. That's when we saw them, an old couple, walking hand in hand, moving slowly down the road toward our house. They looked harmless at first. She had white curls and a long, faded dress. He wore a button-up shirt and those high pants that old men always seem to wear, with suspenders keeping them up. They had this strange synchronized way of moving, like they'd walked this exact same pace for 50 years. They didn't look like they belonged. I don't mean in some magical way, just off. Not in the sense that you'd cross the street to avoid them, but in the way your gut makes a small not even when your brain tells you there's no reason. I figured they were probably just passing through, maybe coming to see the cemetery like so many others. At first, they just paused at the edge of the yard. Then they stepped onto the grass slowly, as if they were trying to seem casual about it. I remember my sister stopped running, confused. We weren't used to people walking that far into the property. Usually they stood at the fence, maybe took a photo or two, and moved on. These two didn't. They just kept coming closer. They weren't smiling, not exactly. Their faces were set in these stiff, uncomfortable shapes. The man had a thin, gray mustache and deep lines under his eyes. The woman's face was pale, her lips drawn too tight. I couldn't explain what it was, but something about them made my skin crawl. Then they started to focus on my sister. I was still standing a few feet away when I saw it, the way they looked at her. Too long, too interested. The man took a few steps ahead of the woman, raising one hand as if to wave, but it looked awkward. Slow, measured. The woman stayed a step behind, her eyes locked on my sister like she was trying to memorize her. They moved closer, just slowly enough that you could tell they wanted it to seem innocent, but not so slow that it didn't feel like they were chasing something. My sister stepped back toward me, her eyes wide. I could see the confusion and fear in her face. I felt it too. It wasn't something we could explain. We were just kids, but something about the way they looked at her, the way they were closing that distance, made every nerve in my body light up. We ran. I grabbed her hand and yanked her toward the house without saying a word. Our feet pounded against the dry ground, heartbeats racing. I didn't look back until we were halfway across the yard, and when I did, they were still coming, just now stepping over the spot where we had been standing. We burst through the back door, slamming it shut behind us. My mom was inside, doing laundry. I remember the way she looked at us, startled, annoyed at first, like we were just being dramatic. But we told her what happened, every detail, from the way they walked to how they kept asking my sister her name, inching closer every second. She took us seriously once she saw how shaken we were. She went outside, but by then the couple was gone. Not in the yard, not at the edge of the cemetery. Just gone. We looked down the road in both directions. Nothing. They'd vanished. She even drove around the block, checking side streets, but there was no sign of them. No car, no footsteps. Nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way the man looked at her. Not curious, not kind. It was like possession, like he'd already decided something. And the woman? She seemed colder, like she was just along for the plan. The next few days passed slowly. We stayed inside more. Mom told us not to go out without her or my dad. I remember I kept looking out the windows, half expecting to see them walking past again. But we didn't. Then came the news. About a week later, I was sitting in the living room. The TV was on, and the local news came up after a cartoon ended. I wasn't really watching at first, but then something caught my ear. Something about a teenage girl who'd been taken. Found days later, bruised, scared, and hurt in the worst ways. And then they showed pictures. It was them, that same couple. Their faces flashed on the screen, grainy mugshots, but no mistake. Same wrinkled cheeks, same pale eyes, same clothes almost. The same people who stood in our yard, who looked at my sister like she was a prize. It was them. They had taken a girl from another town, not far from ours. She'd been walking home from school. They approached her, asked questions, got her close. Then they took her. I couldn't move. I felt like my whole body had gone hollow, like I'd swallowed a bag of ice. My stomach twisted up into a tight ball, and I remember my breath getting stuck in my throat. My mom must have seen my face because she asked what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. I just pointed. She saw them too. The shock in her face told me she hadn't forgotten them. Not for a second. She turned up the volume and sat down beside me, both of us frozen as the reporter went on. The girl had managed to escape. She'd run to a nearby house in the middle of the night, crying and barefoot. The couple had been caught a few towns over, trying to check into a motel under fake names. The story was all over the local news that week. Everyone was talking about how lucky that girl had been to get away. But I knew we were lucky too. We could have been their first attempt. Or maybe not their first. Who knows how many others they'd looked at like they looked at my sister. Maybe we were just in the right place at the right time, with the right instinct to run. Maybe the only reason nothing happened that day was because we were too scared to stand still. After that, things changed. We didn't play outside alone anymore. Mom started locking the doors, even during the day. My sister had nightmares for weeks. So did I. Not of being chased or taken, but of that look, the way they stared, the way their feet stepped onto our grass like it was already theirs. Like we belonged to them. It's been years now, but sometimes I still see them in my mind. Standing there, silent, waiting. That yard is empty now. My parents sold the house a while back, and the cemetery is still there, quiet and forgotten. But that memory doesn't fade. It sticks to me. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we hadn't run. If we'd frozen or answered them. If they'd reached us before we made it to the door. People talk about ghosts in cemeteries, spirits and shadows and cold winds. But nothing in that old graveyard ever scared me like those two living, breathing people who walked into our lives with dead eyes and slow smiles. That kind of evil doesn't float. It doesn't vanish with holy water or chance. It walks. It watches. It waits. And we saw it up close. It's been over 10 years now, but I still remember everything about that weekend like it just happened yesterday. I was 19 then, right on the edge between being a reckless teenager and an adult trying to figure out how to balance curiosity with common sense. I had always been fascinated by paranormal stuff, and so was my close friend at the time. We bonded over weird stories, old ghost documentaries, long nights talking about haunted places, and the kind of unexplained things that most people didn't even want to acknowledge. One day, she bought this thing called the Psychic Circle. It was like a Ouija board, but even more elaborate. It had symbols, words, strange little illustrations, and it came with this thick instruction book that explained how to interpret everything the board said. I remember the way she talked about it with such excitement. I wasn't new to these kinds of boards, but this one looked like something between a board game and a tool you'd see in a witch's den. We tried using it a few times at her house, sometimes at mine too, but nothing ever really happened. At most, we'd get the oracle to slide a bit if we were feeling bored, and tried to fake it just to get a rise out of each other. But there was never anything real. No cold spots, no weird noises, no feelings of anything other than us laughing at ourselves. That changed after she brought it over to her aunt's place one night. Apparently, the two of them had this wild experience with it. She didn't tell me everything, just said things had gotten intense, and that her aunt wanted to keep the board at her place for a few nights. I didn't question it. If someone was finally getting something out of the thing, then great, maybe the location had something to do with it. I was curious, and maybe even a little jealous that I hadn't been part of whatever happened that night. So we planned to go over to her aunt's place that Friday night. Just the three of us. I was honestly looking forward to it. But something hit me the second I got into the car that night. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruin the mood, but I felt heavy. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't fear, not at that point anyway. It was more like I suddenly felt like I didn't want to be going wherever we were going. My stomach twisted in this tight knot. My skin felt cold, and my heartbeat started to pick up before we even left her driveway. I wasn't new to this sort of stuff, and I'd had some strange moments in the past. Cold rooms, flickering lights, the usual unexplained stuff. But this felt different. It wasn't thrilling. It wasn't exciting. It just felt wrong. We drove for a while. Her aunt lived on the edge of town, in this neighborhood that had big houses spaced far apart, surrounded by woods and old fences. It wasn't remote or anything, but there was something about the way the streetlights barely reached the driveways, how most of the houses were dark and quiet like nobody really lived in them. It wasn't spooky in a Hollywood way. It was just quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. When we pulled into the driveway, her aunt's house was lit up, which felt a little comforting at first, but that feeling didn't last long. The moment I stepped out of the car, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. It was like everything around me was holding its breath. There was no wind, no rustling of trees, just dead, heavy stillness. Her aunt opened the door before we even knocked, like she'd been watching us pull in. And from the second I stepped inside, it was clear that something was off. She looked at me like she already didn't want me there. Not angry, just wary, almost like I was a stranger she didn't trust. I'd never met her before, but my friend had told me how sweet she was, how funny and relaxed she could be. That wasn't the woman standing in front of me. Her face was stiff, her eyes didn't soften even when she smiled. Her house was warm, but didn't feel inviting. There were no photos on the walls, which was strange to me. Just paintings, dark, old ones, landscapes mostly. Heavy furniture, dim lighting, thick curtains. It felt like a place that didn't get much natural light, even during the day. We sat down in the dining room, which had a long table in the center, and she brought out the board. And that's when I really felt it. That sense of dread turned into full-blown fear. I didn't say anything, just kept my hands in my lap and watched as she opened the box. The board didn't look like the one I remembered. The one we used had bright, bold colors, golden sunbursts, purple stars, sharp black letters. This one looked like it had been buried and dug back up. The colors were faded, like they'd been left out in the sun for a year, and the cardboard was warped. There were dark stains around the edges, and the glossy finish it originally had was long gone. It looked like something you'd find in an abandoned attic. Even my friend looked confused. I remember her asking what happened to it. The aunt said it had been sweating. That word stuck with me. Sweating, like the board had been alive, like it had reacted to something. I didn't want to touch it. My fingers felt cold and shaky. My heart was racing in a way I couldn't control. But I sat there anyway, trying to tell myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe I was picking up on the weird tension from her aunt. Maybe it was just the atmosphere. But it wasn't just that. I knew something was wrong. When we went to set up, I hesitated before putting my hands on the oracle. My palms were wet and clammy, and I could barely stop them from shaking. I reached out anyway, more because I didn't want to look scared in front of them than because I wanted to participate. But before I could even touch it, her aunt snapped at me. Told me not to. Not just asked, commanded. Her voice was calm, but the way she looked at me when she said it made my blood go cold. Her eyes were locked on mine, like she was seeing something she didn't like. Then she said that they didn't want me there, that they wouldn't talk if I touched it. They don't like you, she said. I can just tell. I remember sitting back in my chair, stunned. I didn't say anything. I just watched her set everything up, but nothing happened after that. No movement, no answers, just silence. After a few more minutes, my friend suggested we leave. We made some excuse, but her aunt didn't try to stop us. She just stared at me the entire time we were walking out the door, like I had ruined something. The car ride back was quiet. My friend was clearly upset. She told me that her aunt had never acted like that before, said she didn't understand what got into her, but she wouldn't talk about it after that. She seemed shaken in a way I hadn't seen before. She didn't ask for the board back either. Her aunt kept it, refused to give it back, and my friend never pressed her about it again. A few weeks later, I bought my own psychic circle board, hoping maybe I could get something going on my own. But it was useless. Nothing ever happened with it. It felt dead. I gave it away eventually to another friend who wanted to try it. I don't know if they ever used it. Even now, I've never gone near another board. Not because I'm scared of ghosts or spirits or demons or any of the usual stuff people talk about, but because of that feeling, the weight in my chest, the cold in my hands, the silence in that house, the look in her aunt's eyes. I don't know what happened to the original board. I don't know what changed it. Maybe nothing happened, and it was all just my nerves playing tricks on me. But I don't believe that. I've never felt anything like that before or since. Whatever was in that house that night, it didn't want me there. And I've never forgotten the way that felt. I didn't sleep much that weekend. I kept waking up, sweating and cold at the same time, convinced someone was standing just outside my room. I never saw anything, never heard anything, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It lasted days, like something had followed me back, but couldn't quite reach me. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of it all. Nothing actually happened. No levitating objects. No faces in mirrors. No ghostly hands. But the dread was real. The fear was real. And the memory of that warped, sun-bleached board sitting on a table while someone stared at me like I wasn't supposed to exist, it still lingers. That was the last time I ever tried to reach out to anything beyond this world. I didn't need a ghost to tell me that something wasn't right. I already knew. I grew up in Brentwood, Long Island. It wasn't the kind of place you'd call exciting. Not dangerous either, not back then. Just another quiet working-class suburb. Rows of modest houses, the smell of lawns freshly cut on Saturdays, and the low hum of passing cars if you stood outside long enough. We moved there when I was around 6, right as summer was ending. The house was bigger than the apartment we'd come from, had a backyard, a pool, and even a small patch of woods behind the property, which as a kid felt like a massive forest. My dad worked nights as a taxi driver in the city. He'd leave around 6 in the evening and come back early morning, just as the sun started to rise. I was an early riser back then, always had been. Every Saturday, I'd be up before 6, parked in front of the TV with a bowl of cereal, watching whatever cartoons were running. One Saturday, just a week after we moved in, I heard the front door unlock. I ran from the living room to greet my dad. He looked exhausted as usual, but smiled when he saw me. We walked into the kitchen, and right then, clear as day, I heard my mom's voice call out from the back of the house. "Hello, honey, don't go in the pool. It's not ready yet." We both froze. The sound came from the bedroom, where my parents slept. But it was Saturday, and on Saturdays, my mom worked the early shift at the hospital. She was supposed to be gone already. My dad looked at me, eyes narrowing. Then he walked to the bedroom. It was empty. Bed made, blinds shut. Nothing there. No one. He came back into the kitchen, tried to play it off like we misheard something, but I knew he was spooked too. We didn't say much more about it. I kept watching cartoons, and he went to shower like usual. But it sat with me. That voice. It wasn't similar. It was her. Exactly her. Tone, rhythm, even the lazy way she dragged out honey. But there was no one there. That was the first thing. A couple of weeks later, some neighbors came over to introduce themselves. 2 women, their kids in tow. There was an older boy, maybe in high school, and a boy about my age. Then 2 girls, one with bright blonde hair and the other with darker brown hair, quiet and keeping to herself. They brought over cookies, said welcome to the neighborhood, and we ended up playing soccer out front. The older boy didn't join in, just leaned on the porch rail watching us. At some point, I realized the younger brown-haired girl had wandered off. I didn't think much of it and kept playing, but after a while, my curiosity got the better of me. I jogged around the side of the house, toward the back. Our yard wasn't fenced in yet. At the far end was the pool, still dirty, half-covered, leaves floating on the surface. Beyond that were the woods. Not deep, maybe 20 or 30 trees before it opened up to another road, but enough to make it feel off-limits. I spotted her just inside the tree line, crouched near a mossy patch of ground, stacking sticks. She looked up when she saw me, smiled. She motioned for me to come over, told me to play tag with her. I was tempted, but something about the way she said it made me hesitate. She didn't move closer, didn't insist, just waited. I told her I'd go get the others. Back at the front yard, I asked the group to come join us. When I mentioned the brown-haired girl, everything got quiet. The mom blinked a few times and said they only had one daughter, the blonde one. I remember looking over at her to see if maybe she was messing with me. She didn't seem confused, just firm. The brown-haired girl hadn't been there in the first place, she said. My stomach dropped. That night, I brought it up to my mom. She brushed it off, said maybe it was one of the other neighbor kids. But I knew what I saw. I even remembered what she was wearing, this faded blue shirt with flowers on the front and black tights with a hole in the knee. It wasn't long before I found out about the girl who drowned. Her name was Isabel. Same age as me. Had lived in the house 10 years ago. Fell into the pool one morning when her mom had gone inside for just a few minutes. They found her face down, floating. The mom never recovered. Died of a heart attack less than a year later. That story clung to the house. It wasn't some dramatic thing you saw in movies. No one screamed at night. No flickering lights or objects moving on their own. It was quieter than that. Subtle. Like the house never fully let go of what happened. We stayed in that house for 6 years. I kept telling myself that I was imagining things, that maybe it was just kid paranoia. But weird stuff kept happening. One night, I was in bed, the summer air so hot we had to sleep with the windows open. Around 2 a.m., I heard splashing. The pool was maybe 15 feet from my window. I looked out but couldn't see much in the dark. I figured it might be a raccoon or something. But then I heard it again. Splash. Then a soft, rhythmic slapping of water, like someone gently kicking their legs. The next morning, I checked. The cover was still on, secured with those heavy metal buckles. No paw prints. No signs of anything. Just a half-deflated pool float drifting under the tarp. Another time, I came home from school and went straight to my room to play video games. The house was empty, Dad asleep, Mom at work. I had just put on my headphones when I felt a light thump under the bed, like someone knocking gently from underneath. I froze, waited, then another thump, and then silence. I slowly leaned down, lifted the sheet, and looked under. Nothing. Dust, old socks, a plastic bin of Legos. I never told anyone about that one. It sounded crazy, even in my own head. But I stopped sitting on the edge of my bed after that. Always sat cross-legged in the center. The woods behind our house started to feel like something to avoid. I stopped going in there completely after the fall of that first year. I was walking home from school, cutting through the trail that connected our street to the main road. Leaves were starting to drop, the ground soft and mushy with rain. I heard footsteps behind me. Turned around. Nothing. Kept walking. Then I heard them again. Not close. Not far either. Just pacing me. When I stopped, they stopped. When I sped up, so did they. But I couldn't see anyone. When I got home, I sat on the porch for 10 minutes, just catching my breath. Never took that path again. Walked the long way around, even when it added 15 minutes. The final straw, for me anyway, happened in 7th grade. I was up late finishing a project. It was around 1 a.m. The rest of the house was asleep. I needed to print something, but the printer was in the hallway closet. I opened the closet door, flipped the light, and froze. There were wet footprints on the floor. Small ones, like a child's. Bare feet. They started from the closet and led down the hallway toward the living room. I followed them slowly, my heart beating so loud I thought I might pass out. They stopped at the sliding glass door, the one that led to the backyard. It was locked, closed tight. I stood there for maybe a minute, just staring. Then I went back to my room and shut the door. Didn't print my project. Didn't sleep. Just stared at the ceiling till the sun came up. We moved out when I was 13. My parents never said why exactly, but I think they knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. The new house was brighter. No pool. No woods. I never experienced anything like that again. Looking back, I try to make sense of it all. Was it grief embedded in the walls? A leftover sadness that stained the air? Maybe. Or maybe it was just a bunch of small, strange moments that built up in the mind of a sensitive kid. I don't know. All I know is that house never felt like it wanted us there. Not in a dramatic, angry way. Just off. Like we were walking into something that had already happened. Something the house couldn't forget, no matter how many times the leaves changed or how many kids played in the yard. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream about that place. Not in nightmares, not always. Just dreams. Me standing at the edge of the pool, looking down at the water, wondering what's underneath. And always, in the dream, it's quiet. Too quiet. Like the world is holding its breath. Like something is waiting for me to turn around. But I never do. I just keep staring. And I always wake up before I hear the splash. About 2 years ago, my life took a sharp turn into a place I never thought I'd end up. It started like so many other things do, with a relationship that seemed good in the beginning. We were drawn to each other hard and fast, like a match struck in the dark. Things burned bright and too hot, and I guess deep down, I always knew that the flame couldn't last like that. But when you're in it, you convince yourself of anything. You mistake intensity for love. You mistake obsession for care. You start rewriting your own sense of normal. At first, it was good, fun. She was exciting and different, and had this energy about her that made me feel like the world had cracked open, and she was the best part inside. She had this way of making me feel like I was the only person that mattered. But that didn't last. The cracks showed up early, but I ignored them. The mood swings, the passive-aggressive comments, the jealousy that came out of nowhere, even when I was doing everything right. I didn't understand what was going on, and I kept trying to fix it. Then came the breakups. Not just one, multiple. It was always the same. She'd cry, say I didn't care enough, that I didn't love her enough, that I wasn't giving her what she needed. Then the next day, she'd text me that she missed me and wanted to try again. And like an idiot, I'd go back. I kept thinking I owed it to the relationship to try. I thought we could work through it. I thought maybe love meant always trying again. But love wasn't what we had. It was something darker, something needier. When it finally ended for real, it was like dragging myself out of deep water. I was exhausted. I had nothing left to give. She dumped me again, and that time, something in me just didn't care anymore. I let it go. I accepted it. And that was when everything really started to unravel. A few weeks later, I met someone new. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but she was kind, honest, easy to be around. There was no drama, no walking on eggshells. It was quiet in the way I didn't realize I needed. It was only about 3 weeks after the final breakup, but it felt like my first breath in a long time. We weren't doing anything crazy, just spending time together, laughing, existing without chaos. And of course, my ex found out. I don't even know how. Probably mutual friends, or maybe she was still checking my social media. Either way, when she heard, she lost it. I started getting these long, guilt-ridden texts, then angry ones, then voice messages that ranged from her sobbing to her swearing at me and calling me a liar and a monster. She said I betrayed her. She said I never really loved her, that I was replacing her like trash. It was unhinged. I stopped replying. I blocked her. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. She still had a few of her things at my place, nothing major. Some clothes, a box of old photos, a pair of headphones. She asked if she could come pick them up. I told her fine, I'd leave them on the porch. She said she wanted to get them herself. I should have said no, but I didn't. I told myself it was one last interaction, and then I'd never have to deal with her again. Just 15 minutes, grab her stuff, leave. That was all. She showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. I still remember the sky. It was that dull, washed-out gray, like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or not. She walked in with a weird kind of calm, wearing this beige coat I hadn't seen before and carrying her purse tight to her body. She looked more put together than usual, makeup done, hair pinned back like she was going to church or something. She didn't say much when she came in, just nodded and walked past me into the bedroom where the box of her stuff was waiting. I stayed in the hallway, keeping my distance. She stood over the box for a second, then turned around and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't move. I didn't know what she wanted. Then she took a piece of paper out of her coat and patted the bed beside her. I didn't want to go sit next to her. Every bone in my body was telling me not to. But I did. I sat down, a few feet of space between us, and she handed me the paper. I looked at it. It was typed single-spaced, about a page long. "Read it," she said. I asked what it was, but she just stared at me, eyes locked and unmoving. I started reading silently to myself, but she snapped and told me to read it out loud. My hands started shaking. The paper was a speech, a full-on monologue written by her about me. It was vicious. It said I was heartless, that I was broken inside, that I manipulated people, that I destroyed her. It said I would never be capable of love, and that no one would ever want me if they really knew who I was. She wrote that I deserved to die, that I was poison. I stopped reading. I told her I wasn't doing this. She started yelling, right in my face. Her voice cracked. She was crying, but there was no warmth in it, just rage. I was backed into a corner emotionally. I thought if I just read it, it would end. So I did. My voice shook. My throat was tight. I read the whole damn thing. And when I finished, she reached into her purse and pulled out a black handgun. I froze. My whole body went cold. I couldn't even make sense of it at first. I thought it was fake. But the way she held it, The way her fingers fit around it, it was real. It was heavy in the air between us. Time felt like it cracked. She looked at me with this weird softness, like she was sad it had to come to this. She told me she wasn't afraid to go to prison, that she'd already looked into it. She said she knew what would happen, who would arrest her, where she'd go. She said it was worth it, because at least I'd be gone, out of this world. One less terrible person to ruin someone else. I sat there, trying to breathe. My mouth was dry. My heart was beating so loud it felt like it echoed off the walls. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just talked. I told her she didn't have to do this, that this wasn't who she was, that killing someone didn't fix pain, that she still had a life outside this room. I tried not to cry, but I couldn't help it. I don't even remember everything I said. I just kept talking. I kept my hands on my knees. I didn't reach for her. I didn't move too much. I watched her finger on the trigger. Sometimes it twitched. Sometimes she looked like she was about to do it. I've never been closer to death than in those 15 minutes. I've never felt so small. And then slowly the gun lowered. She started shaking. Her whole body trembled like her bones were breaking inside her skin. She put the gun back in her purse and zipped it up. She wiped her face and stood up. She said she had to go. I stood too. We looked at each other in this strange, dead silence. Then, for reasons I'll never fully understand, we hugged. Not out of love. Not out of forgiveness. Just something raw. Human. Like two people clinging to the edge of something awful. Then she left. I locked the door after her and collapsed onto the floor. I don't know how long I stayed there. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone right away. I just shut down. I think some part of me didn't want to believe it had happened. I kept replaying it over and over. Every second. Every word. That room still doesn't feel the same. I ended up moving 6 months later. Since then, I've learned she got engaged. I saw the post on social media. Big smile. Ring on her hand. Her new guy looked happy. Maybe he doesn't know the side of her I saw. Maybe she changed. Maybe he's the one who fits. I don't know. But I still flinch when I hear loud bangs. I still double-check my locks every night. I still think about how close I came to dying in my own bedroom. How close I came to becoming just another headline. Some days I try to forget it. Other days I know I never will. I never told my current partner the full story. I just said the breakup was rough, and left it at that. I don't think I'll ever really explain it all. Not the paper, not the gun, not the hug goodbye. There are things we live through that don't make sense to anyone else. They stay with us like shadows, even in bright rooms. And I've learned that real horror doesn't wear a mask. It doesn't need to come from the woods, or the dark, or some twisted fairy tale. Sometimes it sits on your bed in the middle of the day, with a printed speech in one hand and a loaded gun in the other. And it has your name written all over it. I moved to Montreal in late July, right in the middle of that sweltering summer heat. The city was louder than I expected, busier too, but it had this charm about it. The kind of place where you can sit at a cafe with a coffee and hear 4 different languages being spoken within a few minutes. I liked that. It made me feel like I was somewhere bigger than I was. When I landed, I got a new number through Fido. It was just easier to start fresh instead of keeping my old number from back home. I didn't think anything of it. I walked into a store, showed them my ID, picked a basic plan, and left with a SIM card in a little cardboard sleeve. I popped it in on the sidewalk out front, and just like that, I was part of Canadian society. The texts and calls started a couple of weeks later. The first one was from some random Quebec number. French. I didn't understand much, just something like SCK Nina est là? I told the guy he had the wrong number. He hung up. That was it. At first, I assumed it was some friend trying to reach someone who had changed their number and just didn't tell people. Then it happened again. Same thing. French-speaking caller, always asking for Nina. Sometimes a woman, sometimes a man. Different numbers every time. I started blocking them. Sometimes I'd respond in English, saying wrong number. Sometimes I didn't answer at all. But it just kept going. And the weirdest part was that they weren't scam calls. It didn't feel like spam. They sounded real, like people who were confused or upset. Most of the time, they called late at night or very early in the morning. Midnight, 2 a.m. Once, I got a call at 4:47 in the morning. Same question. Nina. The first time it really got under my skin was in October. I was walking back from the metro at night, coming back from a friend's place. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. It was a text in French. I used Google Translate later to check it. It said, "Nina, please, it's been long enough. Call me back. We're worried. Please." It felt wrong. Like I was caught in the middle of something I wasn't supposed to be part of. I didn't answer. I just deleted it. But I kept thinking about it as I walked the rest of the way home. My boots scraping the sidewalk, my breath fogging in the cold. I couldn't shake this image in my head of someone crying while typing that message, desperate for someone who wasn't me to answer. Eventually, I tried to switch numbers. I went into the Fido store and asked if I could get a different one. The guy behind the counter said sure, but it would cost me. I was trying to save money, and I figured maybe the calls would stop on their own. I was wrong. By December, it was just part of life. I'd get these calls every few weeks. Not always, but just often enough to keep the unease alive. Sometimes the calls came in bursts, 2 or 3 within a few days. Then silence. Then back again. It was always someone asking for Nina. Never any other name. Always Nina. January was quiet. I didn't get a single call that month. Part of me thought maybe it had stopped. Maybe the people had finally updated their contact info or stopped trying. I remember feeling a weird kind of guilt about it, like someone out there had given up on her. Or maybe something worse. February came and went. Still nothing. Then in March, the calls started again, and something about them felt heavier this time. One call was from a blocked number, and when I answered, I just heard breathing. No voice, just breathing. Slow, steady. I hung up and turned off my phone for the night. I started saving the numbers and looking them up online. Most of them came back as unlisted or private. A couple were landlines. One was a public phone booth. I didn't even know those still existed. I started asking around. Friends, co-workers, people at the cafe I went to every morning. "You ever get calls for someone you don't know?" They all said no. One guy asked if I'd pissed someone off. I hadn't. I was new here. I barely knew anyone. Then came the morning in April. I remember it perfectly. It was a Saturday, cold but sunny. I was still in bed, not even fully awake yet. My phone rang. Blocked number. I was so used to it by then that I answered it without even thinking. I held the phone to my ear and said nothing. I figured maybe they'd hang up. But this time, a woman's voice came through. French accent, but speaking in English. She said she was with the Montreal police and asked for Nina. Her voice was calm, measured, almost bored. Like she'd done this 1,000 times already. I told her I wasn't Nina, that she had the wrong number. But then she asked if I'd gotten other calls, people asking for Nina. I said yes. She paused. Then she said something that made my stomach flip. "Nina's been missing for over a year." I didn't know what to say. My mouth went dry. I asked her what that had to do with me. She said she couldn't share any details, but she wanted to confirm the phone number, which she read out. It was mine. I told her again. I'd gotten the number from Fido back in July. She said thanks and hung up. That was it. I lay there for a while, just staring at the ceiling. It was one of those moments where your body feels cold, even though you're covered in blankets. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. Deeply, deeply unsettled. Later that week, I went on the Montreal police website. They had a contact form for inquiries. I filled it out. Just a few lines. I said I'd received a call from someone claiming to be with the police. I explained about the calls, the texts, the woman asking for Nina. I asked if there was anything I should know, anything I could do. It took about 2.5 weeks to get a reply. I checked my email every day. Then one morning I saw the response. It was short, polite, almost too polite. It confirmed that a woman named Nina had indeed been reported missing, but they couldn't share any further information due to privacy laws and an ongoing investigation. That was it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I went online. I searched everything I could think of. Missing Nina Montreal. Nina missing Quebec. Fido number recycled Nina. Nothing. Not a single article. Not a single post. No missing person flyers. No news reports. No pictures. It was like she didn't exist. I even checked Reddit. Nothing. I started wondering, what if her disappearance hadn't made the news? That's possible, right? Not every missing person becomes a headline. Maybe she had no family. Or maybe someone had made sure it stayed quiet. But if that was true, then who were all the people calling me? Friends? Family? Acquaintances? Strangers? And why were they still calling over a year later? I went through my call log. I counted the numbers. 37 different numbers since August, all asking for Nina. In May, the calls stopped again. I changed phones in June, but kept the same number. I considered changing it again, but I didn't. Part of me wanted to see if it would happen again. Part of me wanted someone to slip up, to say something they weren't supposed to. By July, it had been quiet for a while. Then, just a few days ago, I got a call around 3:15 in the morning. No number, just unknown caller. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the message the next morning, it was only 5 seconds long. No voice, no breathing, just the sound of a car driving by. Then silence. I've thought about going to the police station in person, asking to talk to someone, but I know what they'll say. Privacy, ongoing investigation, nothing they can tell me. And what could I even ask? Hey, the number you gave me belongs to a missing woman, and I'm getting late-night voicemails of traffic noise. Help. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it's all coincidence. People forget to update their contacts. Fido recycles numbers. The police do routine follow-ups. Weird stuff happens. That's what I tell myself. But it still sits there, like a bad taste in my mouth. Every time my phone rings with a blocked number, I feel that same chill again. That same feeling I had that October night, walking home in the cold, wondering what I was part of without knowing. I don't know who Nina is, or what happened to her. I don't know why her number ended up in my hands, or why no one will tell me anything. All I know is I hope they find her, or found her, one way or the other. And if they don't, I hope whoever keeps calling finally stops. Because sometimes I wonder if they're not trying to reach her. Sometimes I wonder if they're trying to make sure no one else ever does. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who believed in anything beyond what I could see and touch. I still don't really. Not in ghosts, not in spirits, not in curses or possessions. I believe in what's real, what's proven. But there's one story I can never explain. It wasn't even my experience, not directly. It happened to my mother when she was a teenager, but the way she tells it, the way she looks when she tells it, it has stuck in my head for as long as I can remember. And every time she talks about it, which isn't often, I feel that same deep, cold feeling crawl across my skin, like something is standing just behind me waiting. My mom isn't the kind of woman who scares easy. She prays, sure, but she's not one of those people who walk around with a Bible under their arm. She's not one to dramatize or try to scare anyone. She doesn't go to church regularly, never tried to force religion on me or anyone else. But she prays every night, quietly to herself. When I was younger, I used to ask her why, and she'd just say it gave her comfort. I never pushed it. But over the years, I started to notice something else. There were certain things, specific things, that would bring a sharp edge to her calm. Movies, certain subjects, even just the idea of some topics would make her face change. Her body would go still, her voice would drop. It happened the first time I brought home a Ouija board from a garage sale. I was maybe 15. I thought it was just a silly game, something weird and old school. I didn't even take it out of the box before she saw it and flipped out. I've never seen her like that before or since. Her hands actually shook when she told me to get it out of the house. Not asked, told. There was this rage behind her words that I didn't understand. She wasn't just mad, she was afraid. Real fear, the kind that sits behind the eyes and doesn't move. I didn't ask about it again for a long time. Not until I was older, maybe 19 or 20, when I finally asked her what the big deal was. We were sitting in the living room, just the two of us. The TV was off. No distractions. It was quiet, and I asked casually, like it was no big thing. She didn't answer right away. Just stared down at her lap, hands folded. And then she said, "It happened when I was about your age." That's when she told me everything. She had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house. Nothing unusual. It was the 70s, small town, tight-knit group of kids who all knew each other through school. They were just messing around, playing games, eating snacks, the parents in the other room watching TV. No one was drunk, no one was high. Just a bunch of teens staying up late. Someone had brought out a game she'd never seen before. It was a Ouija board, but she didn't know what that meant. It was just a board with letters and numbers, and a plastic piece that moved around when they all touched it. At first, they were laughing, joking around, asking silly questions like, "Does Tommy like me?" Or "Will I be rich?" Nothing happened right away, but eventually the piece started to move. Slowly at first, like someone was nudging it. My mom didn't think anything of it, assumed one of the girls was messing around. They kept playing. Then someone asked if there was a spirit in the house. She didn't remember who. Maybe it was just a joke, but the piece moved to yes. There were a few gasps and giggles, but no one stopped. They kept asking questions. They asked the spirit to show itself. Nothing happened, not at first. And then, all at once, every light in the house went out. The TV in the other room shut off, total blackness for a second or two, and then everything snapped back on like nothing had happened. That should have been enough to scare them, but they laughed it off. My mom said she felt uneasy then, like something wasn't right, but no one else seemed too bothered. They asked the spirit who it was. The piece began to move in slow, wide circles, faster than before. Then it stopped on the letter D. Then E. Then V, I, L. That's when the room went quiet. Not just the game room, but the whole house. Even the TV in the other room had stopped making noise. Her friend's parents were sitting there, frozen, watching the screen like they couldn't move. My mom said it was like time had slowed down, like the house had gone into a vacuum, every sound pulled out of it. One of the girls asked the board, again, maybe joking, if it was the devil, and then told it to prove it. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the TV went black. Not just off, but black, like the screen had died. In the reflection on the TV, they all saw something sitting beside them. A shape. A thing that wasn't there in the room, but was clear in the reflection. Just a shape, dark and hunched. No details. No eyes. But they all saw it. Even the parents. Her friend's mom screamed. The room turned cold. Not just a breeze, freezing, like all the heat had been sucked out. My mom said she felt her breath in the air, like it was winter, though it was summer outside. Then the kitchen exploded with sound. Cabinets slamming open and shut. Dishes clattering, something falling off the top of the fridge, crashing onto the floor. My mom remembers standing there, unable to move. Her legs like concrete. Every sound sharp and angry, like the house itself was furious. The girls scattered. Someone picked up the board and threw it in the trash. One of the parents yelled at them to stop playing. No one knew what to do. No one said anything for a while. They just kind of sat around, stunned. Eventually, things calmed down. The house got quiet again, though no one slept much. My mom ended up sleeping on the floor in her friend's room. She remembers waking up in the middle of the night to a loud noise above her. A scraping sound, a dragging sound. She laid there, listening, trying to convince herself it was nothing. But then she heard something else. Chains. Chains dragging across the roof. And something else with them. Footsteps, maybe, but not like a person. Heavy, uneven steps, and a low growling sound. Then barking. She thought maybe there were dogs outside, but the sound was too close. Too loud. She laid there for hours, frozen, listening. The noises didn't stop until the sun started to come up. In the morning, she asked her friend's parents if they had dogs in the neighborhood. They said no. They also said they'd heard it too, the barking, the chains. But they brushed it off, tried to explain it away. My mom never did. She never went back to that house. She didn't speak to that friend again. Not because she was mad, but because something had changed. Something deep. She said for years she would wake up in the middle of the night, swearing she heard chains dragging outside her window. Sometimes the sound of claws on the roof. Once, she swore she saw that same shape from the TV reflection, standing across the street under a street lamp, just watching. It was gone when she blinked. She never touched a Ouija board again. Never even let the mention of one in her house. She doesn't watch movies about demons or possession. She says those movies invite things in, that they open doors. I used to think that was just fear talking. Now I'm not so sure. The thing that gets me, what really makes my skin crawl, is how consistent her story is. Every time she tells it, it's the same. Same details. Same feeling. She doesn't change a word. She doesn't embellish. She talks slow and quiet, her eyes unfocused like she's watching it all happen again in her head. And every time she tells it, the room gets cold. Not freezing, but colder than it should be. And I always feel that same prickle down my spine, like something is listening. I've never used a Ouija board. Never will. And as much as I love horror movies, I skip the possession ones. I used to think it was all make-believe, just entertainment. But now I think, maybe there are things out there that wait for you to ask the wrong question. Things that want to be invited. Things that listen when you play games you don't understand. My mom never asked for that thing to come into her life, but she opened a door, just once, and sometimes once is all it takes. When I was about 13, maybe 14, I spent the majority of my summer vacation at my grandparents' place. It had become sort of a tradition. My parents worked full-time and didn't want me home alone all day, so they'd pack me off to my grandparents for the break. I didn't mind. They lived in a quiet, older neighborhood, one of those areas where every house looks like it came from the late 70s. Low fences, trimmed hedges, mailbox shaped like a barn, and porches with sun-faded wind chimes that never stopped ringing. Their house had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a hallway that stretched from the living room to the far end, where my room sat opposite theirs. Everything in that house had a specific rhythm. The way the toilet tank refilled after each flush, the soft click of the AC unit switching on, and especially the sound of someone walking down that hallway in the middle of the night. Now, I was a night owl. Always have been. That summer, my sleep schedule had completely flipped. I'd stay up past 2 a.m. almost every night, sometimes for if I got really into whatever game I was playing on my handheld or watching late-night reruns on TV. I'd snack on a little bit of everything, Cheez-Its, ice cream sandwiches, whatever junk food they had, and just lounge in bed like I had no responsibilities in the world. I liked having the house feel like it was mine. Everyone else asleep, nothing but the quiet hum of the fridge and the buzz of my screen. Because of how still and quiet it got at night, I'd started to notice everything. Every creak of the floorboards, every subtle vibration through the walls. The hallway carpet was this thick beige stuff, that kind of old-school shaggy fabric that softens the sound of footsteps, but doesn't make them disappear. You can still feel the dull thump of weight shifting through it. And I got to know that sound really well, especially the specific rhythm of someone walking to the hallway closet, opening it, rummaging inside, and walking back to the bedroom. My grandpa had acid reflux, and like clockwork, he'd get up once or twice a night to grab some Tums or a drink of water. At first, I thought nothing of it. I'd hear the sound of slow, heavy footsteps. He always walked with a certain drag in one foot, shuffle to the closet, stop, then retreat. The routine never changed. He'd usually pause for a second at the closet, maybe leaning on the shelf for support, then shuffle back and close the bedroom door behind him. The house was so old, the door latch always gave a soft click when it closed. I got so used to the rhythm, I could practically time it in my head. But around the second week of my stay, something started to feel off. It was around 1:30 a.m., maybe a little later. I was sitting in bed. Some game paused on the screen while I lazily ate a Pop-Tart, and I heard the footsteps. Same dull thuds across the carpet, one after the other, steady and slow. But something was different. I hadn't heard the bedroom door open. I always heard the door open first, just a light wooden creak. But this time, the footsteps had started halfway down the hallway, as if someone had just appeared there mid-stride. They walked toward the closet, stopped, then nothing. No rummaging, no retreat. I waited. 10 seconds. 30. A full minute. Nothing. Eventually, I crept over to the door and opened it quietly. The hallway was completely dark, except for the little night light plugged into the wall across from the bathroom. It gave off this pale yellow glow that barely reached the floor. I peeked down toward the closet. The doors were closed. No movement. The house was silent. I checked my grandparents' door. It was closed too. I didn't hear the click of the latch earlier, so unless he tiptoed past me faster than usual, it didn't make sense. I told myself I was just zoning out, that maybe I didn't hear the beginning of the walk and imagined part of it, that it was nothing. That's what I kept telling myself. But it kept happening. Not every night, but often enough that I started paying more attention to it. The pattern started to change. The footsteps weren't always coming from their bedroom anymore. Sometimes they started near the living room end and came toward the closet. Sometimes they went all the way to the end of the hallway, right in front of my door, and stopped. Sometimes they'd pause for a while, then turn around and walk back, but I never heard a door open or close. That was the weird part. No sound of the closet door sliding. No click of the bedroom latch. Just footsteps. I started doing tests. I'd wait until the footsteps went down the hall, then I'd quickly jump out of bed and open my door. Every time I did, there was nothing. Not a sound. Not a flicker of movement. Just a dim hallway and a still house. I even tried sleeping with the door slightly open to catch someone in the act. That just made it worse. One night, I was watching some old show on TV when the sound started again. I muted the volume immediately and listened. This time it was loud. The steps were heavier, more deliberate, not dragging like my grandpa's usual gait. They walked down the hallway, past the closet, and stopped just outside my door. I didn't move. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my ears. I was convinced it was my grandpa trying to mess with me. He'd done things like that before, jumping out from behind corners, hiding in the pantry when I least expected it. He had a dry sense of humor like that. So I figured he was just standing outside, waiting for me to open the door. But then the doorknob started rattling. Not just a slow turn, not a gentle wiggle. It rattled, like someone was twisting it back and forth rapidly, slamming the handle against the metal in this chaotic burst of clacking noise. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and yanked the door open. Nothing. Hallway. Empty. I didn't even hear retreating footsteps this time. It was like whoever, or whatever, had been there vanished the moment I opened the door. I looked both ways, checked the closet, walked barefoot down the hall, even peeked into the kitchen. Nothing. Still not wanting to jump to conclusions, I opened my grandparents' door slowly. My grandpa was fast asleep, mouth open, snoring softly. My grandma was curled up on her side, dead to the world. That shook me. If he was out cold, then who had just been at my door? I didn't sleep much that night. The next few days, I noticed other little things. The bathroom door would be cracked open after I swore I closed it. My bag of chips would be slightly open, despite me folding the top neatly. A cabinet in the kitchen that normally stuck shut suddenly hanging wide open in the morning. They were small things, but the kind that stack up over time and make you feel like you're losing grip on what's normal. I tried talking myself out of it. Maybe I was leaving stuff open. Maybe the door rattled on its own. Maybe the sound was from the house settling, or cars outside, or wind against the roof. But it didn't feel like that. I knew this house. I knew its sounds. This was new. One afternoon, while my grandparents were out at the store, I took a look at the hallway closet, the one where the Tums were kept. It was filled with the usual stuff, linens, cleaning supplies, first aid kits. But behind one of the shelves, I noticed something weird. A faint handprint on the back wall, smeared in dust. It wasn't fresh, but it hadn't been there long either. The kind of thing you only notice if you're looking closely. I stepped back, stared at it for a while, then closed the door. That night, I slept with the lights on. I never told my grandparents. I didn't want to seem paranoid or ungrateful, but something about that house wasn't right. It wasn't about ghosts or horror movie cliches. It was something more subtle, more real. My last night there, I didn't sleep at all. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, listening. No footsteps came. No doors creaked. Nothing rattled. It was like whatever had been happening finally gave up. Or maybe it was giving me space. I didn't know. When my parents came to pick me up, I didn't even look back at the house. I tossed my bag in the trunk, got in the car, and stared out the window as we pulled away. A few months later, I heard my grandparents were planning to move again. I didn't ask why, but deep down, I wasn't surprised. That house, like the others they lived in before it, just wasn't right. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. It started out like any regular weekend plan. My buddy Ethan had asked me if I wanted to tag along on a solo hiking trip he had been planning for months. He said it was just going to be a quick overnight trip, something simple and quiet to get out of the city. I had nothing going on and figured the fresh air would do me some good. So I packed my small hiking bag with the essentials: change of clothes, a flashlight, a small tent, a sleeping bag, some food, water, a knife, and my old camping boots. Nothing fancy. I didn't think I'd need much. We left early Saturday morning and drove about 2 hours north. The trail wasn't marked with any official name, but Ethan had found it through some forum online. He said it was an old logging route that had been mostly forgotten. The photos he showed me looked amazing. Trees so tall they looked like they reached the clouds, moss-covered rocks, streams running through narrow valleys. I was sold. We parked off a gravel road, locked the car, and started hiking around 10 a.m. It was a cool, overcast day, the kind that makes the forest feel heavier, quieter. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our boots crunching on dead leaves and twigs. The path started off easy, wide and slightly downhill, but after the first hour, it narrowed and got rougher. Fallen logs blocked parts of it. Thick roots crisscrossed the ground like veins. Still, it wasn't anything unmanageable. We reached the base of a ridge around 1 p.m. and decided to have lunch there. We sat on a flat rock beside a slow-moving stream. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. I remember thinking how peaceful it all was, how untouched. It felt like we had stepped back in time. After lunch, we pushed on up the ridge. That part was tough. The incline was steep, and the trail nearly disappeared under ferns and thick brush. We stopped more frequently to catch our breath, and we were both sweating even though the air stayed cool. It was dead quiet up there. No signs of animals, no insects, no rustling. Just stillness. I kept glancing around, feeling this odd tightness in my chest, like we were being watched. I didn't say anything. I figured it was just my imagination, maybe the quiet messing with my senses. Around 4 p.m., we reached a small plateau near the top. It was a flat, open space with a few dead trees and a broken-down wooden structure that looked like it might have been a shed or shelter decades ago. Ethan wanted to camp there. I didn't really feel comfortable. I couldn't explain it, but something about the spot felt wrong. Still, it was getting late, and the ridge beyond that point looked even tougher. So we set up camp. Ethan pitched his tent near the remains of the old structure. I chose a spot a little farther away, closer to the tree line. We both rested for a while before making a small fire in a metal ring we found buried under the leaves. It was probably left there by someone years ago. We boiled water, made some freeze-dried meals, and ate while watching the light fade behind the trees. That's when I noticed something. There was a tree, maybe 50 feet from where I sat, just at the edge of the clearing. It looked like every other tree at first, tall, bark peeling, branches high, but the trunk had deep scratches running vertically up the side. Not normal weathering. These were fresh, long and deep. I stood up and walked over to it. The marks started about knee height and went up past my head. They looked like claw marks, not from a bear, but narrower, more deliberate, like something sharp had been dragged slowly down the trunk. I ran my hand over them and felt splinters jutting out where the bark had been ripped off. They weren't old, maybe a week or less. I stared into the woods behind the tree, but everything beyond it was just a wall of darkness. Ethan came up behind me, saw the scratches, and just muttered something about mountain lions. But I knew what mountain lion scratches looked like. I had seen them before. These weren't the same, and they weren't part of a territory mark or any behavior I recognized. We let the fire die out around 9 p.m. and crawled into our tents. That's when things got worse. I couldn't sleep. Every little sound, a crack, a shift of wind, even my own breathing, made me twitch. I stared at the roof of my tent for hours, listening. Around 11 p.m., I heard something move through the trees. It wasn't fast, just slow steps. Leaves crunching under weight. Not the kind of scatter an animal makes, but more measured. Like walking. I held my breath. The sound circled the clearing once, then faded. I lay still until maybe 1 a.m., my heart pounding in my ears. That's when I heard something that shook me to the core, a dragging sound, low and slow. Not metal, not wood. Like something heavy being pulled across dry leaves. It came from the direction of the old structure. I sat up, unzipped my tent quietly, and peeked out. It was dark, pitch black. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds. I saw nothing, but the dragging sound continued, moving around the old structure and toward the center of the clearing. I didn't dare step out. I just watched, heart in my throat. Then silence. Dead, awful silence. I must have fallen asleep sometime after that, but not for long. I woke up to the sound of Ethan's tent zipper ripping open. I sat up quickly and looked out again, expecting to see him standing there. But no one was there. His tent was open, but he wasn't in it. His backpack was still inside, half unzipped. His boots were there. Everything was still there, except him. I panicked. I called out his name once, then remembered what he said. No yelling, don't attract predators. I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward the tent. I scanned the area, but the beam of light didn't catch anything but trees and the decaying structure. I spent the next hour searching the area around camp. No sign of him. Not a single footprint leading away, not even broken branches. It was like he had been plucked out of his tent and vanished. By 5 a.m., the first light started coming through the clouds. I packed my things as fast as I could. I didn't care about breakfast. I just wanted to leave. But the trail down was harder than I remembered. My legs were shaking from lack of sleep, and every sound made me spin around. Once, I thought I saw something through the trees, a dark shape, low to the ground, staying just far enough away to blend in. It kept pace with me for maybe 10 minutes before vanishing again. I made it down to the stream where we had eaten lunch the day before. I filled my water bottle and rested, trying to decide whether to keep going or wait for Ethan, in case he somehow found his way back. But then I saw something that nearly made me throw up. There, on the opposite bank of the stream, stuck into a tree, was Ethan's knife. The same one he always kept in a sheath on his hip. It had been driven into the bark, not tossed or dropped, but stabbed deep. The blade was clean, no blood, but the angle was unnatural. No way it ended up there by accident. I left the stream behind and pushed harder down the trail. I stopped less. I didn't eat. I just moved. The last few hours of that hike felt like a blur. I kept thinking about those claw marks, the dragging sound, the missing person, the knife. I passed the last bend in the trail around 2 p.m. and finally saw the gravel road where the car was parked. I ran the last 100 feet, but the car wasn't there. The spot where we had parked it was empty. No broken glass, no tire marks, nothing. Just the gravel, undisturbed. I stood there staring at it for a long time, not even sure what to do. I was too far from any town to walk back. My phone had zero signal. I tried turning it off and on again. Still nothing. I tried climbing onto a nearby hill, hoping to catch a bar of reception, but it was useless. So I sat down on the side of the road and waited. I must have waited 3 or 4 hours, maybe more. The sun was already sinking again when I saw a truck coming down the road, an old forest ranger vehicle. I flagged it down. The ranger asked if I was okay. I didn't know what to say. I just pointed back at the trail and said my friend was missing. They took me to a small station about 20 miles away. I gave my statement, told them everything I remembered. They sent out a search team that night, and for 3 days they combed the ridge. They never found Ethan. Not a trace. Not a piece of clothing. Not a footprint. Not even the knife I saw in the tree. It was like it had all been scrubbed clean. I started to think I had imagined the whole thing, but I still had the photos on my phone from when we first started the hike. Him standing beside me. Him grinning at the stream. Proof he had been there. Months went by. I talked to his family, his girlfriend, his co-workers. No one knew what to think. There were news articles, missing person flyers, even a podcast that mentioned the story. People speculated he'd run off, that maybe he got hurt and wandered away. But none of it made sense. Ethan wasn't that kind of person. He wouldn't just vanish. Not without a fight. And me? I haven't gone hiking since. I stay in the city now, mostly inside. I still think about that dragging sound, the way the woods went quiet, the strange claw marks, and most of all, how Ethan disappeared without leaving a single clue. I try not to dwell on it, but some nights, when it's too quiet, I lie awake and think about the way that tree looked, the way the scratches were fresh. And I wonder, what if we weren't alone out there? What if we weren't supposed to be there at all? I don't talk much about what happened that day. It's not because I'm afraid of how people will react, but more because I don't like going back there in my head. Still, sometimes it creeps up in my thoughts anyway. There was nothing supernatural about it. No ghosts, no demons, no haunted places. It was just one of those moments where the world reminded me how fast things can go wrong, how danger doesn't always come with a warning, and how close you can come to the edge without realizing it. It started simple. My friend Ryan had just bought this beat-up old Jeep from a guy he worked with. The thing was rough, barely street legal, but it had 4-wheel drive and a roof rack. Perfect for the kind of trips we liked to take. We were both 22, out of college for the summer, and trying to get in as many weekend adventures as we could before real life pinned us down. The plan was straightforward. We were going to head out Friday evening, drive a couple hours north into the National Forest area, and find some random dirt road to explore. No set destination, no trail markers. Just turn off when we found a spot that looked good. Bring the basics, food, water, sleeping bags, and a couple of headlamps. We weren't bringing a tent this time, just sleeping under the stars. We'd done it before. Felt safe enough. We left town around 6. It was already getting dim by the time we turned off the highway and onto one of those old forest roads. The kind that start off smooth, but get rockier the farther in you go. Trees closed in on both sides. The sun dropped behind the hills, and soon it was just the bouncing beams of our headlights carving out the road ahead. We passed 1 or 2 overgrown side trails, but Ryan kept going until we found a spot that seemed like a clearing. We pulled over, got out, and checked it out. It wasn't big, but there was enough room to pull the Jeep off to the side and lay our sleeping bags in the grass. No signs anyone had been there recently. No trash, no tire marks. Just a quiet, shaded patch of earth surrounded by tall trees. We set up our spot, laid the sleeping bags out flat, and built a small fire with the dry wood we collected nearby. Made some hot dogs, cracked a couple of beers, and just sat there for a while. You know how it is when you're out in nature. Every little sound feels amplified. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, an owl hooting somewhere far off. At first, it's peaceful. But once it gets really dark, the peace starts to shift into something else. Not fear exactly, more like awareness. You realize how far away from everything you really are. Around midnight, Ryan passed out. I stayed up a bit longer, just staring at the fire and listening. Eventually, I rolled into my sleeping bag too. I remember lying there, staring up through the trees. The stars were bright, really bright. It was one of those nights where you can see the Milky Way if you look hard enough. Then I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a light thud, like someone stepping on the ground. It wasn't Ryan. He was snoring softly to my left. I stayed still, listened. There it was again. Another step, this time from a different direction. Then another. It felt like whatever it was walking around us, keeping distance. Slow, careful steps. I slowly slid my hand into my sleeping bag and pulled out the flashlight. I didn't turn it on right away. I just held it. The fire was dying, only casting a faint orange glow. Another step, then a break, then 2 steps in quick succession. I sat up, turned on the flashlight. Nothing. The beam cut through the trees. Nothing moved. No eyes shining back at me. No animals. Nothing. I stood up and circled the fire pit with the light. The sounds had stopped. Probably just a deer, I told myself. Or a raccoon. Maybe a coyote. They're curious sometimes. Might have come close to check us out. Still, I couldn't shake it. The way the steps moved around us. Not toward the food bag or the fire. Just around. I stayed up another hour, scanning the woods every few minutes, before finally crawling back into my bag. Morning came slowly. Light seeped in through the trees, and the air was damp. Ryan woke up grumbling about the cold. We packed up quickly, ate a few granola bars, kicked dirt over the fire pit, and hopped back into the Jeep. That should have been the end of it. But Ryan wanted to keep driving. Said he saw something on the map, a fire road that climbed up to a ridge with an old fire lookout tower at the top. Supposedly abandoned, but you could still hike to it. We figured why not. We were already out here. So we kept driving. The road got narrower, the trees thicker. Patches of mist hung in the dips. It felt like the kind of place no one came to anymore. We didn't pass a single other car. After about 30 minutes, the road started climbing. We could see glimpses of the valley below through the trees. Then we saw the tower. Just barely. It was at the top of the ridge, maybe another mile up. We parked the Jeep near the base of the hill, where the road became too rough to drive. The path was more of a trail now, covered in leaves and pine needles. We left the Jeep and started hiking. The climb wasn't too bad. Steep in parts, but manageable. We didn't talk much, just focused on walking. The air got cooler the higher we went. After about 40 minutes, we reached the top. The tower looked rough. Old metal frame, rusted bolts. The wooden steps creaked as we climbed them. At the top was a small platform with a 360-degree view. Mountains rolled out in every direction. You could see for miles. It was quiet up there. Wind blowing. Birds calling from somewhere below. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. We stayed up there a while. Took photos. Ate some snacks. Then Ryan said he needed to pee and headed down the stairs. I stayed behind, leaning against the railing, looking out over the valley. Then I heard a sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it kept going, like a low, steady creaking. Then something heavier. A snap. I looked down and saw Ryan standing halfway down the stairs, staring into the woods. I followed his gaze, but didn't see anything at first. Then I did. A figure, standing among the trees. Too far to make out clearly, but definitely human. Tall, not moving. My stomach dropped. Ryan looked up at me, then back toward the figure. He didn't say anything, just kept watching. Then the figure stepped forward, just one step, then stopped again. It was too early in the morning for another hiker to be out here. And the way they were standing, still watching us, it didn't feel right. Ryan backed up slowly, climbing back up toward me. We both stared. Then the figure turned and walked into the trees. Just vanished. We waited, didn't move, waited until we were sure they were gone. Then we climbed down fast and started heading back down the trail. We didn't run, but we didn't walk slow either. The trail suddenly felt different. Too quiet. Every step made more noise than it should have. Halfway down, we noticed something. Footprints. Not ours. These were fresher. The dirt was still dark and wet where the heel had pressed in, and they were going the same direction we were. We stopped. Ryan crouched down and looked closer. These weren't here on the way up, he muttered. He was right. Someone had walked this trail behind us. We kept moving. Faster now. Back at the Jeep, we didn't even stop to talk. Just jumped in and started it up. Ryan reversed fast, spinning the tires in the dirt. We didn't say a word until we were back on the main road. That should have been the end of it. But the next weekend, Ryan called me. Said he couldn't sleep. Kept hearing footsteps outside his window at night. Said it was probably nothing, but he couldn't shake it. A few nights later, I heard something too. Middle of the night. Sounded like someone trying the door handle. Slow. Careful. I didn't move. Just lay there, holding my breath. It stopped after a few seconds. I waited until morning, then checked the door. The welcome mat was pushed to the side. A faint scuff mark on the bottom of the door frame. Could have been anything. Could have been my imagination. But I bought a lock for my bedroom door that day. And a motion light for the front porch. We never saw the figure again. Never went back to that ridge. Never found out who it was. But something about that moment, those slow, careful steps around our sleeping bags, the silent figure watching from the woods, the fresh footprints following our path. It changed how I see the world. Not everything scary hides in the dark. Some things just watch. Wait. Walk behind you. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens. It's knowing how close it came to being worse, and how easily it could still happen again. It started with a wrong turn. I'd been driving all day, leaving behind the dry heat of the valley and heading toward the northern woods, hoping to clear my head after a rough couple of weeks. I didn't plan on staying out long. Just a drive, maybe a short hike, and then back home by night. No overthinking, no big plans. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I just filled up the tank, packed a couple protein bars and a flashlight, and left. Somewhere past the last small town, the paved road turned into gravel. There wasn't much of a sign, just a wooden post leaning sideways and pointing toward what looked like a barely used Forest Service road. My GPS lost signal about 15 minutes earlier, and I figured I'd just follow the gravel road until I found a place to stop and stretch my legs. The road went on longer than I expected. Trees closed in tight on either side, and the further I went, the narrower the path became. Every now and then, I'd pass a rusted-out gate, a broken sign, or a faded trail marker. Most of them were illegible. I thought about turning around, but the road was too narrow, and I hadn't seen a good spot to reverse for a while. So I kept going. After what felt like forever, I saw a small pull-off area just wide enough for my car. I parked, got out, and stretched. The air was cooler here. Damp. The forest around me was dense, but not overgrown. The underbrush was low, mostly pine needles and moss. No cell service. No sounds of people or cars. Just wind in the trees and the occasional bird. I locked my car, stuffed the flashlight into my jacket pocket, and followed a faint trail into the woods. It wasn't an official hiking trail. No signs, no paint on trees. But it was clear enough that someone had walked it before. Maybe hunters or rangers. I kept walking, thinking I'd just go a mile or so and turn around. The trail sloped downhill, winding between thick trunks. A few times I had to step over fallen branches or skirt around soggy patches. The light filtering through the trees had that quiet, green tint to it. It was peaceful, and for a while I felt fine. But the further I walked, the more off everything started to feel. It was subtle at first. The air smelled different, like old water and rust. There were fewer birds. No squirrels darting around. I started noticing deep grooves in the trail, as if someone had dragged something heavy along it. Long, parallel lines in the mud, spaced just right to look intentional. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had hauled supplies down here. Maybe there was a hunting cabin or a shed. Still, my pace slowed. I started glancing behind me more often. The forest didn't look the same in reverse. Every tree looked familiar, like I'd seen it before, but none of it looked like the way back. I took out my phone again. Still no signal. I decided to turn around. That's when I heard something. At first, I thought it was just the wind shifting. A creak, a distant crack of a branch. I stopped and listened. It came again. A slow, dragging sound. Not loud, but close enough that it didn't feel like wind. I crouched a little and tried to pinpoint it. It stopped. I stood still for at least a full minute. Nothing, just my own breathing. Then I turned and walked back the way I came. I walked faster now, trying not to panic. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder. I didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything else. Just the same trees, the same moss, the same faint trail. But it didn't look right. The ground was different. The mud looked disturbed, like someone had walked it after me. I kept going. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Still no sign of my car. The trail twisted and dipped and climbed in ways I didn't remember. I started doubting myself. Had I turned at some point without noticing? Had I followed the wrong set of marks in the moss? Another sound. This time, clearly a footstep. I froze. Not just a step. A squelch of something wet underfoot. Then silence. I turned slowly, heart pounding in my chest. Nothing behind me. Nothing moving. I called out just one word, just to hear my own voice. The sound died instantly, swallowed by the trees. I didn't want to run, but my legs had other plans. I jogged, then ran, not caring anymore if I followed the trail or not. I just moved uphill, thinking higher ground would give me a better view. Maybe I'd see the road. Maybe the sun would start going down and give me some idea which way was west. I crested a small ridge and stopped to catch my breath. That's when I saw it. Down in a shallow hollow below the ridge was a clearing. In the middle of the clearing was a cabin. Not a ruin, not some ancient hunting shack. A real, recently built cabin. Metal roof, clean wood, a porch, smoke drifting faintly from a metal chimney. I hesitated. I didn't want to go down there, but it was the first sign of people I'd seen in hours. Maybe whoever lived there could help. Maybe they had a phone or a map. I moved slowly down the slope. As I got closer, I noticed a few odd things. The clearing was perfectly round. The grass was short, trimmed unnaturally even. No tire tracks. No path leading to the door. Just the trail I had stumbled down. The cabin door was closed. No lights in the windows. But the smoke was real. Someone was inside. I walked up the steps and stood on the porch. It creaked under my weight. I knocked. Once. Then again. Nothing. I waited. Still nothing. I turned the handle. The door opened. Inside, the cabin was warm. Not cozy, but warm. A wood stove crackled in the corner. The furniture was sparse. One table. One chair. A cot. A few shelves. Everything looked handmade. There were no pictures. No signs of technology. No food. No clothes. Just a single book on the table and a large, leather backpack sitting next to the cot. I stepped in, called out. Nothing. Then I heard the door close behind me. I spun around. No one there. Just the door now shut. I opened it quickly and stepped back out onto the porch. The clearing was empty. The woods beyond were still. I left the door open and stepped away from the cabin. I had no reason to trust that place. I just wanted to find the road. I circled the clearing. I looked for tire tracks, a path, anything. There was nothing. No footprints. No sign of anyone coming or going. The trail I'd come from was gone too. Just grass. I turned back to the cabin and saw something that made my stomach twist. The smoke from the chimney was gone. The door was shut again. I didn't hear it close. I stepped back onto the porch and knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. On the side of the cabin, near the corner, there was a large metal hook embedded into the wall. Below it, the grass was flattened. Dark. Stained. I backed away. Whatever this place was, I wanted no part of it. I walked back into the woods, away from the clearing, not caring anymore which direction I went. I just moved. Branches scratched my face. I tripped more than once. My hands were scraped raw from catching myself on bark and rocks. Then out of nowhere, I stumbled back onto a trail. Not the same one. This one was wider, firmer, used. I followed it. It led uphill, then flattened out, and after maybe 45 minutes, I saw a sign nailed to a tree. It was old, but readable. It pointed toward a parking area, 1 mile ahead. I nearly cried. I kept walking. The trail curved again, and then I saw the gravel road. My car, still parked in the same spot, coated in pine dust and sap. I ran to it, got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time. Eventually, I turned the engine on and drove back the way I came. I didn't stop, not even in the small town. I drove until I hit pavement again, then until I saw power lines, then until my phone buzzed back to life. I didn't tell anyone, not at first, but I looked up the area. I tried to find that road again. I couldn't. I even went back once, a few weeks later, with a friend. We drove every gravel road we could find in that part of the forest. No sign of the trail. No sign of the cabin. Nothing. I still don't know what I walked into that day. I don't know who built that cabin, or why it felt like the whole forest was pushing me toward it. But I haven't hiked alone since, and I never will again. It was early September, just when the days were still warm, but the nights started to feel sharp with the hint of the coming cold. I had taken time off work, something I rarely did, and decided to spend a week alone at my uncle's hunting cabin. It was deep in the woods, about 2 hours from the nearest gas station, and you had to drive on a dirt road for 20 minutes after leaving the main highway. The place had no running water, no electricity, just a gas stove and an old wood-burning heater. I needed the break. I was getting burned out. The city, the noise, the constant connection to my phone and emails, it was all wearing me thin. I packed enough supplies for a week: canned food, bottled water, a sleeping bag, my old .22 rifle just in case some coyotes got too bold, a camp lantern, and a few books. I wasn't expecting anything more exciting than some hikes, reading, and maybe fishing in the nearby creek. When I arrived, the cabin looked just like I remembered from the last time I was there with my uncle years ago. It was simple: one room, wooden walls weathered gray by decades of storms and sun, and a small porch out front. The front door creaked the way I remembered, and inside, the air smelled of dust and wood smoke. There was a journal on the shelf, old entries written by my uncle about hunts and observations of wildlife. The first 2 days were exactly what I hoped for. I walked trails I hadn't seen since I was a kid, ate simple meals, sat on the porch as the sun went down, and listened to the forest slowly take over the night. It was a quiet I hadn't realized I missed. No hum of traffic, no chatter from neighbors. Just wind through trees and the occasional bird call. On the third day, I decided to hike farther than usual. I packed a small backpack, took my rifle and some water, and planned to make a wide loop that would bring me back to the cabin by dusk. The forest was thick and alive. Pines, birch, and maples crowded the trail. The farther I walked, the less defined the path became. It was clear that nobody had been this way in a long time. I followed a shallow ravine down toward a creek I had remembered from years ago, one that my uncle said was good for fishing. I never reached the creek. It was maybe mid-afternoon when I noticed something off. I was deep in the woods, no trails anymore, just forest floor, but I had been paying attention to the slope of the land and the position of the sun. I knew roughly where I was. I stopped to drink some water and rest when I noticed the smell. It wasn't strong, just faint but wrong, like meat left out in the sun. Rotting. I thought maybe a deer had died nearby. That wasn't too unusual, but then I saw something that stopped me cold. On the trunk of a tree about 10 feet ahead was a deep gouge. Not just bark peeled by weather or a bear's claw. This was cleaner, more purposeful, as if someone had taken a blade to it. I looked around and saw another mark on a tree a few steps beyond that. It was the same height, same angle. The hairs on my arms stood up. I'd seen trail markings before, ribbons tied to branches, blazes cut into trunks by hikers or hunters. But this wasn't that. There were no signs of humans otherwise. No boot prints, no wrappers, no cigarette butts. Just these cuts. I should have turned around, I knew it. But I was curious and stupid. I followed the markings. They weren't consistent, not at regular intervals, but they kept showing up. Sometimes 3 or 4 trees in a row, then nothing for 10 minutes. Then another. I walked slower now. I held my rifle in my hands. I told myself maybe it was some old hunting marker from decades ago. The sun was getting lower. The light shifted to a warm, golden color, and I realized I needed to head back. I turned to retrace my steps, confident I could follow the terrain back up the ravine. But as I walked, things didn't look right. The slope felt off. Trees I thought I recognized weren't there. And then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Another gouge mark. Same angle. Same depth. On a tree I hadn't passed before. That's when it hit me. These weren't marks someone made to guide themselves forward. They were to guide someone back. They were pointing inward. I had been walking in, following a path someone else had made, possibly for themselves, possibly for something else. The forest got darker quicker than I expected. The air cooled fast. I tried to pick up my pace, pushing through undergrowth, my heart starting to race. Every branch that snapped under my boots felt too loud. I stopped to catch my breath and listen. I heard something move behind me, not leaves rustling in the wind. Something stepping. I froze. Slowly, I crouched and waited. The sound stopped. I stayed there, crouched low, for maybe 2 minutes. Then it started again. One slow step, then another. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear breathing, no growl, nothing human or animal. But something was out there. I stood and started walking quickly, nearly jogging, choosing a direction I hoped was toward the cabin. I no longer cared about the ravine or the sun. I just wanted to be out of that forest. But the faster I moved, the more I felt like I was being followed. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen. Sometimes I'd hear nothing. Sometimes a snap. A shift in the underbrush. I never saw anything. Not even a shadow. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I saw something familiar. A fallen tree with a split trunk I remembered passing on the way in. I was close. I sprinted now, straight through thorns and brush. I fell once, skinned my elbow, didn't care. I got up and ran until I saw the cabin through the trees. I didn't stop until I was inside and the door was shut. I locked it, latched it, then dragged the wooden table in front of it. My hands were shaking as I lit the lantern. The cabin felt small, too open. There were windows on all 4 walls. I pulled the blankets over them. Then I sat in the corner with my rifle and waited. That night I didn't sleep. I heard things outside. Twigs snapping. What could have been footsteps? Once I thought I heard a low hum, like someone exhaling slowly. It could have been my ears playing tricks on me. But I kept the rifle pointed at the door. Morning came slow. When the light finally pushed through the cracks in the blankets, I waited another hour before moving. I opened the door and stepped outside, half expecting to see something left behind. A footprint, a claw mark, nothing, just quiet trees and cold morning air. I packed my things quickly, left some of the canned food behind. I didn't care. I didn't stop to clean. I didn't write in the cabin journal. I got in my truck and drove fast, the dirt road shaking my tires, the forest blurring past the windows. I didn't talk about what happened. Not at first. I just told people I cut the trip short. When my uncle called and asked if I had gone up to the cabin, I told him yes. He asked if I had seen the markings on the trees. I hesitated and said yes. He told me he started noticing them 2 years ago. Thought maybe it was some old trapper or a bear. But he said one night he heard something breathing outside the window, and it wasn't any animal he could name. He hadn't gone back since. I haven't either. That cabin still stands. The trail still leads into the forest. And I think sometimes about those gouges in the trees. Who made them? Why? And what was following the path they created? I don't know if it wanted to be found, or if it wanted to make sure I never found my way back. It started as a regular trip I took every few months to unwind from work. I liked remote places, somewhere far from traffic, far from notifications, and far from people. I had booked a small off-grid cabin in northern Montana, tucked somewhere between the mountains and dense stretches of untouched forest. It belonged to a retired park ranger who built it himself and rented it out occasionally. No Wi-Fi, no cell reception, no electricity. Just a wood stove, a hand-pump sink, and a solar lantern. That was exactly what I needed. I arrived around mid-afternoon after a long drive. The directions took me off the main highway and onto a narrow dirt road that curved through miles of pine and spruce trees. The air smelled clean, and the only sounds were birds and the crunch of gravel under my tires. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, it looked even smaller than the photos, but solid. There was a single room, a porch with a rocking chair, and a fire pit out front. A small outhouse sat about 30 yards away near a cluster of brush. Behind the cabin, the woods thickened into a near wall of green. It felt like I had the world to myself. I unpacked my gear, stocked some canned food inside, and laid my sleeping bag on the bed. There was a trail just behind the cabin that the owner had marked with a red ribbon on a tree. It wasn't on any maps. He said it led to a ridge with a great view if I felt like hiking. I figured I might check it out in the morning. That first evening, I made a small fire and cooked a can of beans with sausage over it. I sat in the chair, watching the flames flicker, feeling the tension in my body melt away. The stars came out fast in the deep mountain dark. I must have stayed out there for hours, just listening. At some point, I heard what I thought were twigs snapping in the woods. I paused, but it wasn't close, and it could have been anything. A deer, a rabbit, maybe wind. I went inside and slept hard. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds calling through the trees. The sun filtered in through the one small window. I boiled water for instant coffee and sat out on the porch sipping it. That trail had been on my mind since I arrived. After breakfast, I grabbed my day pack with a water bottle, a first aid kit, a knife, and a few snacks, and headed toward the red ribbon. The trail was narrow, winding between trees and over rocks and fallen branches. There was a natural silence out there, broken only by my own footsteps and the occasional flutter of wings. I walked for maybe 40 minutes before the trees started thinning and the land began to rise. Then suddenly, the ridge opened up, and I saw why the old ranger mentioned it. The view stretched for miles. Green slopes below, a few scattered lakes catching the sun like mirrors, and snow-tipped peaks off in the distance. I stood there for a long while, letting the breeze hit my face, just absorbing it. I thought about heading back, but noticed something odd off to the right. There was another path, less defined, with no markings, but the ground had clearly been walked on. It wasn't an animal trail, too wide for that. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. It didn't take long for things to feel different. The trees seemed taller here, the light dimmer, even though it was barely past noon. The trail was harder to follow, but I kept seeing signs that someone had come through, boot prints, old snapped branches, even a cigarette, but at one point. I started to get a weird feeling in my gut, that something about this place wasn't right. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. Still, I should have turned back. I kept going, deeper into the woods. That's when I saw it. A structure, barely visible through the trees. Not a cabin, not a shack. More like the frame of something made of rough, uncut logs tied together. It stood maybe 6 feet tall and formed a kind of triangle. It didn't have walls, just 3 poles leaning into each other, with bones, actual bones, strung up by cords inside the frame. Some small, like rabbits. Others, I don't know, bigger. The bones were sun-bleached, arranged in patterns. I stopped in my tracks and stared at it, feeling cold despite the heat. It didn't look like anything ceremonial or decorative. It felt wrong. Wrong in a deep, physical way. My stomach tightened, and my skin prickled. I turned to go back. I didn't want to know more. I just wanted to be back at the cabin. But when I turned around, I couldn't find the trail. I walked back the direction I thought I'd come from, but after 5 minutes, nothing looked familiar. I checked for the boot prints I'd followed. Gone. I circled around, but every direction looked the same. Trees, ferns, shadows. I tried not to panic. I'd done wilderness hikes before. I knew how to backtrack. But nothing was helping. I was lost. I climbed up a rock outcropping to try and get a look over the trees. Nothing but forest in every direction. No sound of roads, no cabin roof in sight. I shouted once, just out of instinct. But of course, no one answered. I had my pack, so I had water. I had snacks. I had daylight. I sat down to breathe and plan. I told myself to stay calm, stay put, and retrace my steps slowly. I marked a tree by scoring it with my knife. Then I picked a direction and began moving again. It took hours, but finally, I stumbled back onto a trail. Not the original one. This one was wider, flatter. It had to be a service trail or maybe a fire break. Either way, I followed it. I followed it until my legs were jelly and my throat was dry. And just when I thought I might have to spend the night out there, I saw the cabin roof through the trees. I nearly collapsed when I reached the porch. I went inside, sat on the floor, and stayed there until my breathing slowed. I didn't go back out that night. I didn't even build a fire. I just locked the door and stared at the window until I fell asleep in my clothes. The next morning, I was sore and angry at myself. Angry for getting lost, for pushing too far, for letting fear get the best of me. I told myself the structure could have been anything. Maybe someone's hunting shrine. Maybe some backwoods art project. I wasn't going to let it ruin my trip, but something had changed. I noticed footprints around the fire pit that weren't mine. Deeper treads, wider than my boots. I checked around the back of the cabin. There were more, faint in the dry dirt, but visible. Someone had walked around the place while I was inside. I checked the door and window. Still locked. Nothing broken. But that didn't calm me. I stayed close to the cabin that day. Read a bit, gathered firewood, kept my knife close. Every few minutes, I caught myself glancing at the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I didn't sleep much. I'd blown out the lantern and was lying in the dark when I heard the first sound. A soft scrape, then another. Not inside, outside, near the back. It was steady, deliberate, something brushing the side of the cabin. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. I waited, holding my breath. Then it stopped. Silence. I stayed like that until the sky started to lighten. I don't think I moved an inch. When the sun came up, I stepped outside. Nothing. No tracks this time. Nothing out of place. But I'd heard it. I knew I had. That morning, I packed up. I didn't stay the last 2 nights I'd planned. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to get out of there. I left the cabin cleaner than I found it, locked the door, and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the paved road. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station with working lights and other people. Back in town, I messaged the owner to let him know I'd left early and thanked him. He replied a few hours later, polite and short. Said he understood. I didn't mention the structure or the sounds. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I kept thinking about the footprints. They weren't mine, and they didn't follow me from the woods. They came from the trees behind the cabin, from the direction of that second trail. I hadn't come that way. That means someone else had, and they were close, closer than I ever realized. It started with a simple idea. I wanted to be alone for a while. Just disappear off the radar for a week, maybe 2. Work had been piling up, life was dragging along, and I was constantly surrounded by noise, people, expectations. I wasn't running away exactly, but I needed distance from everything. So I looked up some remote cabins in the mountains, picked one far from cell coverage and town lights, and booked it. The place was tucked away in the Rockies. No neighbors, no trails, no marked roads after a certain point. The last 20 miles were nothing but gravel, then just dirt. When I finally pulled up, it was early evening. The cabin was small and weathered, with a rusting tin roof and thick logs forming its walls. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by thick pine forest. There was a tiny creek running behind it, and just the faintest smell of wet leaves and moss in the air. Inside, it was plain. A cot, a table, a wood stove, and a few shelves with old books and some tools. No electricity. No running water. I liked that. It was exactly what I had wanted. I unpacked, lit a fire, boiled some water from the creek, and made instant noodles for dinner. Then I sat by the fire until it burned down and went to sleep. The first couple days were peaceful. I spent time walking in the woods, chopping some firewood, and just sitting quietly. I wrote in a notebook, watched squirrels chase each other, listened to the birds. My phone was off, stuffed into my bag under the cot. I wasn't tempted to check it. There was no signal anyway. At night, it got cold, and the silence wrapped around me like a blanket. Real silence, the kind you only get when you're far, far away from everyone. But by the 4th day, things started to shift. It began with small things. I noticed footprints near the creek. At first, I figured they were mine, but they were spaced differently. Heavier, larger. I stood next to them, compared my boots. These weren't mine. Maybe a hunter or hiker passed through, but the tracks came from the woods, followed the creek for a few feet, then disappeared back the way they came. Later that afternoon, I thought I heard movement deeper in the forest. A branch snapping, a crunch of dry leaves. It could have been an animal, sure. There were elk and deer in the area, probably even bears. Still, it made the hairs on my arms rise. I reminded myself that I was alone out here. Nobody had any reason to be sneaking around. I locked the cabin door that night. It felt silly. There was barely even a real lock. Just a wooden latch you could break through if you leaned on it. But it made me feel better. I left the fire going longer, just to keep the shadows away. By the 5th morning, I was getting uneasy. I found more tracks near the cabin. They were close to the firewood pile. Fresh. Like someone had walked right up to the side of the cabin and stood there for a while. My skin crawled when I saw them. I stood still, looking around the clearing. I didn't see anything, but I felt watched. I packed a small bag, took a hatchet, and headed out in the direction the tracks came from. The forest swallowed sound quickly. Within a few minutes, all I could hear was the wind through the trees. I moved slowly, scanning for any sign of whoever it might have been. I saw nothing. No movement. No sound. I circled back around after an hour, uneasy and unsettled. That night I barely slept. I kept jerking awake, thinking I heard something. Once, I was sure I heard soft, crunching footsteps near the window. I sat up in the dark, gripping the hatchet with sweaty hands. My heart was pounding. I didn't move for hours. By the 6th day, I was ready to go home. But the problem was, my truck wouldn't start. I turned the key and nothing happened. Not even the engine trying to turn over. Just dead silence. The battery was fine the day before. I checked under the hood. Nothing looked wrong. I opened the gas cap. Still had plenty. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the trees. I didn't like the idea of leaving the cabin. It was about a 20-mile hike back to the main road through dense forest and steep ground. I knew the general direction, and I had a paper map in my bag. But I also knew that it would take most of a day, and I'd have to spend a night somewhere in the woods before reaching help. Still, the idea of staying another night made my stomach tighten. I spent that day preparing. Packed my bag carefully. Food, water, flashlight, extra socks, compass, knife. I decided to leave at first light. I tried to sleep early, but every noise outside made my mind race. Around midnight, I heard something knock against the wall of the cabin. It wasn't hard, just a soft thump. Then silence. Then again, a little closer to the window. I sat up, listening. It was like something was brushing against the logs of the cabin, moving slowly around it. I held my breath. I didn't move. The noise stopped. But a few minutes later, I heard it again, right outside the door. A gentle push, like someone testing it. The wooden latch creaked, but held. My mouth was dry. I gripped the hatchet again, sitting there in the dark. After what felt like hours, the noise faded. At dawn, I left. I didn't eat. He barely drank. I just threw on my bag, locked the door out of habit, and started walking. The woods felt different. Every sound snapped too loud. Every shadow too sharp. I kept looking over my shoulder. Every now and then, I thought I heard steps behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. Around midday, I found a trail. It wasn't on my map. It was faint, narrow, overgrown. But someone had walked it recently. Fresh boot prints. They weren't mine. I stopped, looked around. I should have kept going in the direction I was heading, but something pulled at me. I wanted to know who else was out here. I followed the trail. Slowly, quietly. After about half a mile, I saw movement ahead. I froze and ducked behind a tree. Through the branches, I saw someone standing in the trees. They were maybe 50 yards away, not moving, just standing there, dressed in dark clothes. I couldn't see their face. They weren't doing anything, not walking, not looking around, just standing still. I backed away, quietly, carefully. I turned and walked fast in the other direction, not running, but close. I didn't look back. The trail curved, dipped, then started climbing again. I didn't stop until the light began to fade. I found a flat patch of ground and made camp. No fire. I ate a granola bar and drank some water, then lay in my sleeping bag with the knife under my hand. I kept thinking about the figure in the woods. Why were they just standing there? Watching, waiting. Sleep didn't come easy. I woke up constantly, heart racing, ears straining. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps. Not animals. Deliberate. Soft. Getting closer. Then stopping. I lay there, frozen. The footsteps circled around, then slowly faded. At first light, I ran. I didn't even pack my sleeping bag. I just grabbed my pack and took off. I followed the compass west, toward the highway. My legs burned, my feet blistered, but I didn't stop. Around noon, I heard an engine. I stumbled out onto the gravel road, just as a truck was coming up. I flagged them down. The man inside gave me a strange look when I told him where I'd been. He said that area hadn't had people in years, not since the logging roads were closed. He dropped me off in town. I didn't go back for my truck. I called a tow service to recover it a few days later. They said it was fine, battery fully charged, no mechanical issues. Just started up like normal. I never went back to that cabin. I don't know who or what was in those woods, but I know I wasn't alone. Something was watching me, following me, maybe waiting for me to make a mistake. Whatever it was, it stayed out of sight, but not out of reach. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I think about that sound outside the cabin, the soft scrape along the wall, the footsteps near my tent, the still figure in the trees, and I wonder if they're still out there, in the quiet woods, waiting for the next person to come looking for silence. It was supposed to be a quick weekend getaway, just me, some peace, and the woods. I needed to clear my head. Life had been getting heavy, work stress, city noise, people everywhere. So I took my old Subaru, packed up a small tent, a sleeping bag, and a few essentials, and drove 3 hours out to a small patch of forest I had found on a hiking forum. It wasn't a campground. It wasn't marked. Just a spot someone had mentioned with good views, a small creek, and enough distance from other people to breathe. I got there around noon on Saturday. The drive was uneventful. Asphalt gave way to gravel, and gravel gave way to packed dirt with overgrown grass brushing up against the sides of my car. Eventually, I parked in a small clearing, barely big enough for one vehicle, and started the short hike into the trees. There was no trail, just directions I screenshotted off the forum. Head east until you hit the fallen oak with a hollow center, then follow the slope down and stay left at the split boulders. I found the spot. It took maybe 20 minutes of bushwhacking and checking the screenshots every few steps. The area opened into a wide dip between two low ridges, with a shallow creek running along the left side. Moss-covered stones sat in the water. The sun filtered through tall pine trees. No cell service, no voices, no car engines in the distance. It was exactly what I wanted. I set up the tent just off the creek, on a flat patch of ground, rolled out my sleeping bag, took a few photos of the area, then sat on a log and ate some trail mix while listening to the birds. I spent most of the afternoon exploring around the dip. There wasn't much wildlife beyond squirrels and birds, but I saw a couple of deer tracks near the water. The air was cool and clean. The forest was quiet in that calming way that feels like a blanket over your ears. Every now and then, a branch would creak or a bird would call out, but otherwise it was still. By the time the sun started to lower, I was back at camp. I built a small fire using some dry wood I found nearby. I cooked a packet of instant rice and beans and ate it slowly, watching the flames pop and twist. The stars came out one by one. No moon, just black sky and pinholes of light. It was peaceful. Around 10 p.m., I put out the fire, zipped myself into the tent, and tried to fall asleep. But I couldn't. I'm not sure why. I wasn't scared, just alert, like my body wasn't ready to sleep yet. I lay there in the dark, listening. The creek, the occasional breeze moving leaves. Then nothing. Silence again. I tried to relax, counted slowly, breathed deeply. I must have drifted off eventually. I woke up suddenly. It was still dark. I checked my watch. 1:46 a.m. Something had changed. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. Then I noticed the silence. Even more silent than before. No water sounds. No breeze. No insects. No rustling. Just dead air. Heavy and still. I sat up slowly, listening hard. Then I heard it. A faint crunch. Like a footstep. Not close. Not loud. But definite. On the ridge above me, maybe 30 or 40 feet up. I froze. Waited. Another crunch. Still faint, but clearly a step. Not an animal moving through brush. Too heavy. Too slow. Too deliberate. I reached quietly for the flashlight next to my sleeping bag. Clicked it on. The beam lit up the inside of the tent. Then I unzipped the door slowly and aimed the light toward the slope. Nothing. Just trees and underbrush. I scanned the ridge line slowly. Left to right. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I turned the light off and listened again. Silence. I waited maybe 10 more minutes, kneeling just inside the tent door. Nothing. I zipped the door back up, lay down, and left the flashlight in my hand. My heart slowed eventually. My mind told me it was probably a deer, or a raccoon, maybe a falling branch I misheard. The creek had started flowing again, the sounds returning. I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep. I lay there in and out of shallow rest. Every noise made me perk up. The woods didn't feel right anymore. Not hostile, exactly. Just off. Then a new sound. Water, but not the creek. Splashing. Steps in the creek. I sat up again. Checked my watch. 3:12 a.m. I held my breath. The splashes weren't far, just a few feet from my tent. They were slow, spaced out, like someone walking across the shallow part. One step, then another, then another. No animal moves like that. Not in a straight line. Not at that pace. I clicked on my flashlight again and pointed it toward the creek. Nothing. I stood up, unzipped the tent door, stepped out barefoot, and aimed the beam around. The water was still. The stones hadn't moved, but my skin crawled. Every part of me was screaming that something wasn't right. I swept the flashlight back and forth, over the ridge, into the trees, then down the creek line. Nothing. The sound had stopped. I backed slowly into the tent and zipped it closed again. I didn't turn the light off. I sat cross-legged, staring at the door, flashlight in hand, just waiting. By dawn, I was still awake. The moment the first bit of light broke through the trees, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. Everything looked normal. Birds were chirping again. The creek gurgled like it had the day before. But there were footprints. In the mud next to the water. Not boot prints. Bare feet. Human. Wide. Deep. Like someone large had walked slowly across the creek, right where I had heard it. The tracks went from one side to the other, and then into the brush toward the ridge. I stared at them for a long time. Then I packed up. I didn't eat. Didn't even brush my teeth. Just threw everything into my pack, rolled up the tent without care, and started hiking out. I checked over my shoulder constantly. Every few steps. No sounds behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I followed the way back, past the boulders, up the slope, found the fallen oak. As I got closer to where I parked, something in the underbrush snapped loudly. I turned, flashlight still in my pack, and saw a shape. Not clearly, just a glimpse. Something ducked behind a tree. Tall, not wearing clothes. Pale skin. I didn't wait. I ran, sprinting the last 100 yards to my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and didn't stop to catch my breath until I was a full mile down the dirt road. I didn't report it. Who would I tell? There were no signs of violence. No one else out there. Just weird sounds and footprints. And that glimpse of something I'm still not sure I saw. But I know what I felt. Something was watching me that night. Something moved through that creek deliberately. It wasn't a camper. No tire tracks. No voices. No other tents. No gear. Just silence, footsteps, and the sense that I had been studied. I haven't gone camping alone since. That was 2 years ago. I kept those photos I took when I first arrived. The view of the creek, the trees, the campfire. I used to look at them and think of peace. Now I don't look at them at all. Because when I zoomed in on one, a picture of the ridgeline above my tent, I saw something I missed before. In the trees, between two trunks, there's a shape. Tall, pale, barely visible in the shadows. Watching, it had been there since before dark, and I never heard it arrive. It started with a last-minute decision. I was supposed to meet a friend for a weekend hike in a remote part of the state, but he bailed the night before. I had already packed, cleared my schedule, and told everyone I'd be off the grid for a few days. I didn't feel like canceling everything just because he couldn't make it, so I decided to go alone. The trail I picked was one I'd never done before. It ran through the foothills of a low mountain range, nothing extreme, but far enough from any towns that I knew I wouldn't see many people. The weather was decent, overcast but dry, and I figured I could knock out 2 nights out there before heading home Sunday afternoon. I left the trailhead around noon on Friday. There was a small gravel parking lot with a signboard, a faded map of the area behind cracked plexiglass, and a single porta potty that smelled like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Mine was the only car in the lot. That didn't surprise me. This trail wasn't popular, and it wasn't peak season. The trail started off easy, wide and flat, with pine needles muffling my footsteps and the faint smell of sap in the air. After a couple of miles, it narrowed and started weaving through thicker woods. The silence was deep, not dead, but quiet in a way that made you notice your own breathing. Just the wind moving through the trees and the occasional chirp of a bird far off. I hiked steadily for about 4 hours. The plan was to reach a small clearing by a creek I'd read about online. Some guy on a hiking forum said it was a great spot to pitch a tent, not too far from the trail, but hidden enough that you'd feel completely alone. That's what I wanted. Solitude. When I got there, it was exactly how he'd described. A little flat patch of grass with soft ground, a few large rocks around the edge, and a gentle creek about 10 feet away. The sound of the water was calming. I set up my tent, took off my boots, and just sat there for a while. No phone, no people, no noise, just wind, trees, and water. I cooked a simple dinner over my camp stove, cleaned up, and hung my food bag from a nearby tree. It started getting dark around 7. By 8, the forest was completely black. I sat in my tent, reading a paperback book by the light of my headlamp until my eyes got heavy. I woke up once during the night. I'm not sure why. Something must have pulled me out of sleep, but there was no sound, no movement. I just opened my eyes and felt off. I listened. Nothing. Just the creek. Still, I laid there for a long time, wide awake, staring at the roof of my tent. Eventually, I drifted off again. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I made coffee, packed up my stuff, and followed the trail deeper into the woods. The plan was to loop around a few small ridges and end up at another clearing on the far side of the area. I moved slowly, taking breaks to drink water and check my map. There were no trail markers, just faint signs of footsteps and a few blazes carved into trees. I had to pay attention. Around midday, the air changed. The wind died, and the forest got still in that eerie, heavy way like right before a storm. But the sky wasn't dark. It was just quiet. Too quiet. I kept moving. At one point, I stepped into a wide, low area, maybe an old dry creek bed or a section of trail that had washed out long ago. The ground was soft, almost spongy. I noticed something that made me stop. A shoe print. Fresh. It wasn't mine. It was facing the opposite direction. Someone else had come through here not long ago. That wasn't strange on its own, but the more I looked, the more I saw. Another print, then a third, but they weren't spaced right. Not like someone walking. They were in clusters, like someone had stopped, turned, stepped in place. I followed them for a few feet. They went into the trees off the trail. No path, just broken sticks and flattened grass. Something about it unsettled me. I don't know why, just the way the steps moved, stopping and turning like someone was pacing or watching. I told myself it was nothing. Probably another hiker who got lost and doubled back. Still, I picked up my pace. By late afternoon, I reached the second clearing. It was smaller than the first, but still flat enough for my tent. The trees were denser here, making it darker even though the sun wasn't down yet. I felt tense for reasons I couldn't explain. I kept looking over my shoulder, listening, but there was nothing. Just me. That night I had trouble falling asleep. I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to calm my thoughts. Every little noise outside made my ears perk up. I started regretting coming out here alone. At some point, I did sleep, but not deeply. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Not the creek this time. Something else. A thump. Faint but definite. It came from somewhere to my left. Then another. Thump. Like someone walking. Carefully. Slowly. I froze. My heart started pounding. I listened hard. Thump. Then silence. Then a crack. A branch. Then nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. Just the forest again. I didn't move for over an hour. Just laid there, clutching the knife I kept in my pack. Eventually, dawn started creeping in, and the fear faded just enough for me to crawl out and check around. I didn't see anything. No footprints. No broken branches. No sign of anything out of place. Still, I packed up quickly and decided to head back. I didn't feel right. Something about the area felt wrong now. Heavy. Watching. I followed the loop trail back toward the original clearing. I figured I'd make good time and just camp there again before leaving in the morning. It would mean one more night, but I didn't want to rush and get hurt hiking tired. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a ridge that looked familiar. I stopped to check the map. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. It was my campsite from the first night. I hadn't made the full loop. Somehow I doubled back without realizing it. But that didn't make sense. I'd followed the trail, the same one from the map. I didn't stray. I stood there, confused, staring at the empty clearing. Then I noticed something hanging from the tree where I'd hung my food bag. It was my food bag. I had taken it down. I remembered clearly. I packed it, ate from it the next day. There's no way it should have still been there. I walked up to it slowly. It was tied the same way I had left it, even though I remembered untying it myself. My hands started to sweat. I looked down at the ground around the fire ring. My footprints were still there. It was like I had never left. but I knew I had. I'd walked over 10 miles. I'd crossed ridges, past landmarks. I even remembered the place where I saw the strange footprints. I wasn't losing my mind. Something was wrong with this place. I backed away from the clearing and turned around. I decided right then I was done. No more camping. No more trying to finish the loop. I was heading straight back to the car. I followed the trail, moving faster than before. I didn't stop for water. I didn't take breaks. I just walked. The shadows got longer. My legs burned. My shoulders ached. But I kept going. Just before sunset, I saw something through the trees. Gravel. A signboard. My car. I've never been so relieved. I unlocked the door, threw my gear in the back, and drove away without looking back. The road twisted through the woods for a long while before opening up to empty fields and eventually the highway. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the trail, the prints, the bag still hanging from the tree, the thumping sound in the night. Something happened out there. I can't explain it. It wasn't ghosts or monsters. It wasn't some fairy tale. But something happened. Maybe the trail is messed up, looping in ways it shouldn't. Maybe someone's out there, watching hikers, pacing near their tents, moving their stuff. I don't know. All I know is that I'm never going back. And if you ever find yourself alone in the woods and something doesn't feel right, don't wait. Trust that feeling. Get out. Because whatever was out there with me, it wasn't just the trees creaking or animals in the brush. It was something else. Something that wanted me to stay lost. And maybe, if I hadn't turned around when I did, I'd still be out there, wandering that same loop, never leaving. It started with something simple, a work trip. I was sent out to a remote site in eastern Oregon by the small construction firm I worked for. We were contracted to inspect an abandoned hydroelectric dam, the kind built back in the 1930s, all cracked concrete and rusting steel. It hadn't produced power in decades, but the county wanted to turn the surrounding area into some kind of park or outdoor learning center. My job was to take photos, assess structural stability, and make notes about safety concerns. That was it. The dam sat about 15 miles off the nearest highway, reachable only by a dirt access road that hadn't seen maintenance in a long time. I drove a rented truck, one of those boxy 4X4S with stiff suspension and loud tires. The drive was bumpy and slow, but the land out there was wide and quiet, nothing but pale yellow grass, old pine trees, and dry air. Cell service dropped about halfway in. I wasn't worried. I had my printed maps, the GPS on my camera, and a satellite phone in case anything really went wrong. I arrived mid-morning. The sky was cloudless and sharp blue, the sun already beating down hard. The dam stretched across a narrow river gorge, holding back a small, murky reservoir. On the far side, rocky hills rolled up toward tree-covered ridges. The structure looked mostly intact from a distance, just old. Streaks of mineral stains ran down the face. Bushes and weeds had crept in around the base. The access gate was unlocked. I parked near a rusted utility shed and grabbed my gear. Helmet, clipboard, camera, water bottle, and a flashlight. The air was dry and buzzing with insects, the only sound aside from the slow trickle of water leaking through the cracked spillway. There were no birds, no wind. The dam had three main parts: the control building at the top, the spillway at the center, and the intake tunnels beneath, where water once rushed in to spin the turbines. I started with the building. It was a low, square structure made of reinforced concrete, its flat roof lined with rusted railing. The door creaked open with a groan. Inside, the floor was cracked and covered in leaves, dirt, and mouse droppings. Electrical panels lined the far wall, their labels faded and wires gutted long ago. I took photos, making slow circuits around the room. Something about the place felt wrong, not scary exactly, just off. Like time hadn't just stopped here, but gotten stuck. The air was still. The dust looked undisturbed, and my own footsteps echoed too loud. After an hour or so, I climbed down to the base of the dam via a metal ladder bolted to the side. The descent was steep, and the steps were slippery with moss. Once I reached the bottom, the view was different, less majestic, more claustrophobic. The concrete loomed above me like a wall. The intake tunnel sat in shadow, 3 wide, circular mouths cut into the base, each tall enough for a man to walk into. I shined my flashlight into the center one. The beam stretched maybe 30 feet before fading. The floor looked slick, with pooled water and scattered debris, sticks, leaves, and old branches that must have drifted in when the reservoir was higher. I noted down the erosion on the tunnel lip, then took a few more photos. Then, like a fool, I stepped inside. It was cold in there, much colder than outside. My boots scraped against the floor, sometimes slipping. The tunnel curved slightly to the left. I kept walking, my flashlight beam jittering with each step. At some point, I stopped hearing the insects outside. The light at the entrance faded behind me. I told myself I was just checking for signs of collapse, but I walked deeper than I needed to. I passed a rusted pipe on the right wall, snapped off and dangling. Something about it looked wrong, like it had been torn instead of corroded. I paused and snapped a photo. Then I kept going. The walls started to sweat moisture. I felt it drip on my face. And then something moved. Just up ahead, past the reach of my flashlight, something shifted. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I held the light steady. Nothing. Just wet concrete and scattered debris. Maybe a rat. Or an echo of my own movement. I told myself that, but I turned around and started walking back. Except it felt longer going back. I knew I hadn't gone more than 50, maybe 60 feet in, but my boots scraped for what felt like 10 minutes. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain I would see something behind me. Nothing came. Finally, the light of the entrance appeared again. I stepped out, squinting against the sunlight. My skin was cold, my shirt damp with sweat. I walked around for a bit, tried to shake it off, then climbed back to the top. By mid-afternoon, I was done with most of the photos. I decided to spend the night in the truck. There was a small clearing near the access road, flat and free of brush. I set up a small camp stove, made some instant noodles, and tried to relax. The stars came out early. I listened to the sounds around me, coyotes yipping far off, the faint rustle of wind through grass. But I couldn't stop thinking about the tunnel. Around 11 p.m., I climbed into the truck bed, lay down in my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. The night was cold. I kept waking up. Once I thought I heard footsteps in the gravel nearby, but when I sat up, there was nothing. The next morning, I decided to finish one last thing, mapping the tunnel layout. I wanted a clearer picture of how deep they went. I had a laser measurer in my gear, but it hadn't worked inside the tunnel, something about the wetness or the curvature. So I decided to use a rope. I tied a spool of thin, orange rope to a stake and walked back into the center tunnel, unspooling it as I went. This time, I moved faster. I passed the broken pipe, then kept going. The air was thicker today, and the smell was worse, like rot and mildew. I covered my nose with my sleeve. At about 150 feet in, I reached a metal grate, bent inward as if something had pushed it from the reservoir side. Water trickled through the bars, but it was black and sluggish. I took another photo, turned around, and started back. Halfway to the entrance, I heard it again. This time, it was clear. Something scraped along the wall behind me. I spun, flashlight trembling. There was nothing, just the echo of metal on concrete. I walked faster. Then the rope jerked. Hard. I turned around. The rope had gone taut, vibrating slightly. Something had grabbed it. I pulled. It pulled back. I dropped the spool and ran. I made it to the mouth of the tunnel, burst into the sunlight, and stumbled to the ground. My knees were shaking. I looked back. The rope was limp again, lying in a loose coil near the tunnel entrance. I didn't go back. I packed up everything in less than an hour and started driving. The road felt even worse going out, every bump jarring. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again, and even then I didn't rest. I drove all the way back to town, to a cheap motel near the office, and slept with the lights on. Back at work, I turned in my photos, filled out the reports, and told them the tunnels were unstable. Dangerous. Could collapse at any time. They thanked me. A week later, they sent a new team to follow up. I never heard back from them. About a month after that, I got a call from the county. One of their surveyors had gone missing on site. His truck was found near the access road. The gate was still unlocked, but no sign of him. They asked if I had seen anything unusual when I was out there. I told them no, because I couldn't explain it. Not in any way that would make sense. Not without sounding like a lunatic. A few weeks after that, I got curious. I looked up the old dam online, dug through newspaper archives and forums. There wasn't much. A few old photos. One blog post from a local fisherman talking about the area being strange. He said the fish never swam near the dam, that the water tasted off, that animals wouldn't go near it. Then I found something else. A digitized copy of a maintenance report from the 70s. It mentioned issues in the intake tunnels, something about unusual damage, unexplained shifts in pressure, and repeated complaints from workers about noises underground. They sealed off part of the tunnels shortly after. They didn't say why. I don't go near dams anymore. I asked to be assigned to road jobs, rural developments, solar panel fields. Anywhere but old hydroelectric plants. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the scrape of metal on concrete in my dreams. Sometimes, I dream that the rope is still out there, stretched tight into the dark, still connected to something waiting at the other end. It started out as a normal weekend. I had taken Friday off work to give myself a 3-day break. I needed it. I had been swamped with deadlines, barely sleeping, barely eating, and the burnout was catching up fast. A friend had told me about this small, secluded cabin deep in the forested part of the state, near a place called Rock Hollow. I had never heard of it, but that was the whole point. No people, no noise, no pressure, just me, the woods, and a chance to breathe. I drove out early Friday morning. The further I got from the city, the more the tension in my body started to fade. Trees replaced buildings, and the highways thinned into winding two-lane roads. I followed the directions my friend had emailed, eventually reaching a narrow dirt path that split off from the main road. It was barely wide enough for my car. Branches scraped the sides as I inched along, and for a moment I second-guessed this plan, but I reminded myself I wasn't here for luxury. After about 20 minutes of crawling through the thick woods, the trees suddenly opened up, revealing a clearing with a small wooden cabin in the center. It looked weathered but sturdy. The wood was dark with age, the roof a patchwork of old shingles, and a small stone chimney poked out from one side. There was no electricity, no cell signal, no internet. Just the basics. A bed, a wood stove, a few cabinets stocked with canned goods and supplies. It was perfect. I unpacked, set up my sleeping bag on the small cot, and took a walk around the clearing. The forest was thick all around, the tree line dense and deep. It was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds, no wind. Just the sound of my boots crunching dried leaves. I figured the place was just so remote that animals stayed away from the clearing. That first night was peaceful. I sat outside as the sun dipped below the trees, watched the sky shift into deep blue and then black. Stars poured across the sky, more than I had seen in years. I made a small fire using the stacked wood beside the cabin, warmed up some beans in a tin pot, and ate them while listening to the crackle of the flames. When I turned in, I slept like a rock. The next day, I decided to hike. There were no marked trails, but I had a compass and a decent sense of direction. I set out around mid-morning, pushing through underbrush and weaving between thick trunks. I wasn't trying to get anywhere specific. I just wanted to explore. The woods felt untouched, like no one had stepped foot there in decades. I moved slowly, taking it all in. The stillness, the smell of damp earth, the shafts of light breaking through the canopy. About an hour into the hike, I came across something that made me stop. It was a tree, or rather what had been a tree. It was snapped clean in half about 10 feet up. Not cut, snapped. The top half lay on the ground a few feet away. The break looked strange. The wood was shredded, not like it had cracked in a storm, but more like something had twisted it. I stared at it for a while, then walked on. Another 20 minutes later, I found more. Another tree, same kind of break. Then another. It was like something had torn its way through the forest. I started to feel uneasy. There were no tire tracks, no signs of logging, no chainsaw marks. Just these torn, broken trees. I decided to turn back. That's when I realized I hadn't been paying attention to my direction. The sun was overhead now, no longer giving me a sense of east or west. I checked my compass. It spun wildly in my hand. The needle jittered, pointing in random directions. I tapped it, shook it. Nothing. It was useless. I took a breath and tried to retrace my steps. I remembered a twisted pine stump, a large rock covered in moss. I walked, trying to spot those landmarks again, but everything started to look the same. The trees were thick, and the underbrush was denser now. I didn't want to admit I was lost, but I was. Panic crept in, but I pushed it down. I knew the clearing couldn't be more than a couple miles away. I could find it. I just had to stay calm. I picked a direction that felt right and walked. I walked for over an hour. Still nothing. That's when I started hearing something. It was faint at first, like a low hum or a distant engine. I stopped walking and held my breath. The sound was gone. I took a few steps, and it started again. It wasn't an engine. It was breathing. Deep, slow, heavy breathing. Not mine. Not close, but not far either. I turned in a circle, trying to spot movement. Nothing. Just trees and silence. I walked faster. The sound followed. Every time I stopped, it stopped. Every time I moved, it returned. Like something was pacing with me, just out of sight. At one point, I saw a flicker of movement behind a tree. I froze. A dark shape, tall and still, just standing there. Then it was gone. I didn't hear it move, didn't hear footsteps or branches snap. It was just gone. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes and skin. I tripped, fell, scrambled up again. The forest seemed endless now, like it was swallowing me. No trails, no breaks in the trees. Just thick green everywhere. My lungs burned. My legs shook. Eventually, I found something. A structure. Not the cabin. This was different. A shack, half collapsed and rotting, hidden behind a wall of brambles. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The door hung off one hinge, the inside dark and filled with debris. But it was shelter. I crawled inside and sat against the far wall, trying to quiet my breathing. I waited. Hours passed. Light faded. Night crept in. I couldn't hear the breathing anymore. Maybe I had lost it. Maybe it wasn't even real. I didn't sleep. I kept my back against the wall, eyes on the door. Every sound outside made me flinch. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. My imagination turned everything into a threat. When dawn came, I forced myself to leave. I had to find the cabin. I had no food, no water, and I was miles from my car. The forest looked different in daylight. Less menacing, but still unfamiliar. I walked for hours. My legs ached. I felt dizzy, dehydrated, sore. Then I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. Footprints. Not mine. Large, deep, barefoot. They led through the mud between two trees. I crouched down to look. The toes were long, the arch wide. Too big to be human. But the strangest part was how fresh they looked. The edges were clean, not yet dried or weathered. Something was near. I heard the breathing again. Closer this time. I ran. I don't know how long I ran. Long enough that my legs gave out. I collapsed on the forest floor, gasping. I expected to be grabbed, dragged into the trees. But nothing happened. Eventually, I stood and kept walking. Slower this time. Sometime in the late afternoon, I broke through the trees and into the clearing. The cabin stood where I left it. My car was still parked beside it. I didn't stop. I sprinted to the car, unlocked it with trembling hands, and got in. I started the engine and backed up, tires spinning in the dirt. I didn't look back. I drove for hours until I reached the nearest town. I checked into a motel and collapsed on the bed. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't report it. What could I even say? A few days later, when I had calmed down enough, I called my friend to ask about the cabin. He said he had never been there himself, just heard about it from someone else. I didn't press for more. I still don't know what I saw out there, what followed me, what watched me. But I know this. Something lives in those woods. Something that doesn't want to be found. Something that watches, waits. And I don't think I was the first person it watched. I just hope I was the first to get away. It was a Saturday afternoon when I decided to take a break from everything and head out to the woods alone. Life had been getting heavy. Work stress, bills piling up, just everything. I needed quiet. I needed space. There was this small state forest about an hour's drive from my apartment. Not well known, barely maintained, and definitely not crowded. That made it perfect for what I needed. I packed light. Just a backpack with the basics. A tarp, sleeping bag, flashlight, some snacks, water, a knife, lighter, a first aid kit, and my old metal thermos filled with coffee. I left my phone in airplane mode. I didn't want texts, calls, notifications, nothing. I wanted to feel disconnected for once. By 4 p.m., I had parked at the edge of a gravel turnout and hiked down the narrow trail that led into the forest. The trees were thick, mostly pine and oak, the kind of woods that absorb sound. After just 5 minutes of walking, I couldn't hear the road anymore. Birds chirped faintly, but mostly it was quiet. Really quiet. I didn't follow the main trail for long. After about a mile, I cut off and went deeper into the trees. I was looking for a place that felt like no one had been there in a long time. Eventually, I found a small clearing with soft moss underfoot, a few rocks, and low-hanging branches that would help support the tarp. It was perfect. Setting up took maybe 20 minutes. I tied the tarp between two trees at an angle and laid my sleeping bag underneath. Then I sat on a flat rock and poured myself some coffee, watching the golden afternoon light pour through the trees. I could feel the tension draining from my body. Time passed slowly, in a good way. I ate a protein bar, then walked a bit, following a deer path that led to a shallow creek. The water was cold and clear, and I splashed some on my face. When I got back to my spot, the sun was dipping low, and the air had started to cool. I lit a small fire in a safe ring I built with stones. Nothing big, just enough to keep warm. I roasted some almonds I brought, wrapped myself in the sleeping bag, and leaned back against my pack. The stars started to appear one by one through the breaks in the trees. I listened to the wind. I let my mind settle. Around 10 p.m., I put the fire out and lay down. The woods were darker than I expected, almost pitch black. I closed my eyes, ready to sleep. But I couldn't. Not yet. There was a sound. Not loud, just a small crunch of dry leaves. Then another. I held my breath and listened. Could have been a raccoon. Or a possum. Nothing big. But it wasn't just one sound. It came again, from a different direction. Then silence. I sat up slowly, heart beating a little faster. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on. A beam of light swept through the trees. Nothing moved. Everything looked the same. Still, I didn't lie back down. Instead, I waited. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. Just when I thought I had imagined it, the sound came again. This time closer. Like a footfall. Slow. Deliberate. I stood up. My hand went to the knife at my side. My light flicked back and forth between trees. I took a few steps out from the tarp, listening harder than I ever had before. Then silence again. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably a deer or a coyote checking me out. Curious, maybe sniffing for food. Nothing to panic over. Still, I didn't lie down again. Instead, I sat up against the rock, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, trying to stay alert. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, it was dawn. The light was dim, but enough to see that everything looked untouched. Nothing missing. No footprints. Just forest. I packed up early. Something about the night didn't sit right. I told myself I was overthinking, but I still wanted to head back. As I walked, I stuck to the trail, checking over my shoulder more than I should have. I wasn't relaxed anymore. I was alert. Tense. That was when I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A tree, not a big one, maybe 6 inches thick, had been cut halfway through. Not chopped like by an axe or a saw. It had been bent and twisted, and it was fresh. The wood inside was pale and still wet. No bark, just shredded in a way that didn't look natural. Maybe an animal had done it. But what kind of animal did that? There were no claw marks, just that weird spiral twist halfway up the trunk. I kept walking. About 10 minutes later, I found a small pile of stones stacked neatly in the middle of the path. Balanced like a cairn, but too small for any trail marker. For rocks, stacked in size order and dead center in the trail. I walked around it. By the time I got back to my car, the sun was up and the air was warm again. I drove home without turning on the radio. That whole day I couldn't stop thinking about the noises. The tree, the stones. I tried telling myself it was nothing. Just forest stuff. Wind. Animals. Coincidence. But a few days later, I looked at the trail map online. Something I hadn't bothered doing before I went. The thing that stuck out was that the forest I had camped in wasn't exactly a loop. Most of the official trails circled the outer edge. The middle was mostly uncharted. No marked paths. No cleared areas. The weird part, the clearing I had stayed in wasn't on the map. Not even close to any of the drawn routes. I had gone way off. Too far in. I zoomed in more. Right near the spot where I remembered sleeping, there was a tiny red marker someone had added. A user comment. Just one. No description. Just one word. Don't. I clicked it again. Nothing more. Just that word. My stomach sank. My mouse hovered over it for a long time. Then I closed the tab. I haven't gone back since. Every time I think about it, I remember how the woods sounded that night. How it wasn't really silence. How there was something in that stillness. Something watching. Something waiting. And now, Whenever I hear stories about people who go missing in forests, the kind that search and rescue never find, I think back to that night. I think back to the crunching footsteps that stopped when I listened, to the tree twisted like something had grabbed it, to the rocks stacked right where I had to see them. I think back to that one word on the map, and I understand it a little more now. Don't. Just don't. I never liked long drives at night. Something about the endless darkness, the way headlights barely cut through it, always made me uneasy. But that Thursday night, I didn't have a choice. My uncle had called me around 4 p.m. to say he needed help moving some stuff out of his old place before the landlord came the next morning. He was way out past the edge of town, in a rental cabin deep in the hills, surrounded by woods and barely any reception. I owed him a few favors, and he offered to cover my gas and dinner, so I packed some snacks and left after work. It was already getting dark when I pulled onto the last stretch of road. The main highway had slowly narrowed into a two-lane back road, then into a winding gravel path with more potholes than flat ground. Tall trees lined both sides, their branches curling above like ribs in a skeleton, blocking out whatever moonlight was left. My phone had no signal for the past 20 minutes. No signs, no houses, just dirt, rocks, and forest. I finally pulled up to the cabin just before 9 p.m. The lights were off. No truck in the driveway. At first, I thought maybe I had the wrong place, but I recognized the old satellite dish out front and the pile of chopped firewood by the porch. I parked and waited a bit, thinking maybe he was inside or out back. When nothing happened for a few minutes, I killed the engine, stepped out, and tried knocking on the front door. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. The wind had picked up, making the trees creak above me. I called his name, feeling more awkward than concerned. Still no answer. I walked around the side of the cabin, trying to peek through the windows. Every one of them was dark. I figured maybe he'd gone into town and just wasn't back yet. But I didn't want to waste the trip, so I thought I'd at least check if the back door was unlocked and wait inside. The door was open. Not wide open, just slightly ajar. Enough that I noticed it as soon as I stepped onto the back porch. I paused, the hair on my arms prickling up. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe he left it open by mistake. Maybe he was just careless. Still, something felt wrong about walking in without knowing for sure. But it was cold, and I didn't want to sit in the car all night. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring a little. The place smelled musty, like wet wood and dust. I fumbled around for the light switch and flipped it on. The bulb above me flickered and buzzed to life, casting a pale yellow glow across the small kitchen. Nothing seemed out of place at first. A few dishes in the sink, an empty coffee cup on the counter, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the table. The only thing that stuck out was the duffel bag by the fridge, unzippered halfway open, with clothes spilling out like it had been dropped in a hurry. That didn't sit right with me. My uncle was a slob, sure, but this looked like someone had been interrupted mid-pack. I called his name again, louder this time. Still nothing. I walked through the cabin, room by room, flipping on lights as I went. The bedroom was empty. The bathroom door was open, light off, nothing inside. I checked the living room, which was really just a couple of mismatched chairs and a lumpy couch facing a small TV. No one. I stood in the middle of the hallway, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to get back in the car and leave. Another part figured I should wait at least an hour, just in case he came back. I sat down on the couch, pulled out my phone again, still no signal, and waited. That's when I heard it. A slow creak. Not like a house settling. This was different. Sharp. Intentional. Like someone had stepped on a loose board somewhere behind me. I turned around fast. Nothing. I got up, heart thudding a little faster, and walked to the back door. Still closed. I checked the windows. All shut. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to convince myself it was just an old house groaning in the cold. Then I heard it again. A little louder. Closer. This time I didn't wait. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a fire poker by the stove, and slowly walked back down the hallway. I checked the bedroom again. Empty. Same with the bathroom. No sign of anything. I checked the front door. Locked. Everything was sealed tight. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The duffel bag by the fridge. It was zipped shut. I stared at it, my mouth suddenly dry. I hadn't touched it. I knew I hadn't, but it was closed now, zipped clean across the top like it had never been touched. I backed away from it, heart pounding in my ears, and went to the couch to grab my keys. I was done. Uncle or not, I wasn't staying another second in that cabin. I had just reached the door when I heard it, something heavy hitting the floor in the bedroom. This wasn't a creak or groan. It was a thud, solid and clear. I didn't move for a full 5 seconds. I just stood there, frozen, listening. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No sounds. Just silence again. I slowly walked back down the hall, holding the fire poker, so tight my fingers hurt. I stepped into the bedroom, flipped on the light, and scanned the room. The closet door was wide open now, and inside the closet on the floor was a pair of muddy boots. Not my uncle's. These were bigger, heavier, with deep treads caked in reddish dirt. I stared at them, not sure what I was looking at. Then I saw the footprints. Faint, but they're leading from the closet, across the floor, to the window. And the window was unlocked. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted down the hallway, out the front door, and straight to my car. I didn't even lock the doors before turning the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. I slammed it into reverse, gravel spraying as I backed up too fast, then shifted into drive and tore down the dirt road, headlights bouncing over every dip and rock. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway. Only then did I pull over, chest heaving, hands shaking. I sat there in the driver's seat for what felt like forever, just trying to breathe. Eventually, I turned the car around and drove straight to the sheriff's office in town. I didn't care if it sounded crazy. I told them everything, how the door was open, how the bag had changed, the boots in the closet, the noises, everything. They sent someone up there right away. I followed in my car, this time with 2 deputies in a cruiser ahead of me. We arrived just before midnight. The cabin was dark. We walked in together, guns drawn, lights scanning every room. Nothing. No boots. No bag. No footprints. Everything was exactly like I had first seen it when I got there. But the back door? It was wide open now. They didn't find my uncle that night. Or the next. His phone was off, his truck was missing, and none of his friends had heard from him. They eventually found his wallet and keys in a ravine 2 miles away, tossed near some rocks like garbage. He never showed up again. I don't know what happened in that cabin. I don't know who was in there with me, or how they got in and out so fast. But I know what I saw. I know the bag was open, then zipped. I know those boots weren't there before. And I know that sound I heard, those footsteps, they were real. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had opened that closet instead of running. If I had stayed a few minutes longer. I don't drive at night anymore, and I've never been back to that cabin. But the worst part, every once in a while, maybe once every few months, I get a call from a blocked number. I never answer it, but they never leave a voicemail either. Just silence, like someone on the other end is waiting, listening. I've had a few weird things happen to me over the years. Nothing extreme, just little things that I couldn't explain at the time, but always figured had a rational explanation. A weird cold spot in a warm room. Something small moving from where I swore I left it. That kind of stuff. I never thought much of any of it. I was the kind of person who rolled their eyes at ghost stories and figured people exaggerated. Maybe their brains just filled in the blanks when they were tired or scared or whatever. That was always my way of looking at things. I didn't believe in the paranormal. Not really. At least not until that night at the dorms 4 years ago. It happened toward the end of my freshman year. I had a good year overall. I was at a solid state college, made a few close friends, had a roommate I actually liked, and the usual mix of parties, late-night fast food runs, and cramming for exams. The dorms were nothing special. Standard college stuff. A long hallway of rooms, white walls, linoleum floors, the occasional peeling corner of ceiling tile. You could smell everyone's instant ramen and microwave popcorn. Each hallway had 4 rooms, 2 people per room. At the end was this big metal door that led into the shared hallway, and then across from that was the bathroom, which also had a heavy steel door like something out of an industrial facility. The doors had those thick rectangular windows, the kind with wire mesh inside the glass. You couldn't really see much through them except for vague shapes and motion. Anyway, the last couple weeks before finals, something felt off. I remember walking into the dorm after a long day of class and feeling this weird pressure in my chest. Not physical pain, just this heavy, tense feeling. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Finals were coming, deadlines were looming, everyone was sleep-deprived and on edge. It made sense, but as the days went on, the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. I'd walk through the main door to our hall and feel like I'd stepped into a vacuum. It was like the energy was just sucked out of the air. My roommate felt it too. Everyone on our floor seemed a little more anxious, a little more silent. Still, no one said much about it. We were all just trying to survive the last push of the semester. One night, I was studying late in my room. It was past midnight. I'd had a mix of Red Bull, coffee, and some Adderall to keep me focused. Probably too much of all three. My notes were scattered across my bed and desk, laptop screen glowing a little too brightly in the dim room. My roommate was gone. He'd gone to crash at his girlfriend's dorm for the night. After a few hours, I felt gross. My brain was wired, but my body felt sluggish. I figured a hot shower might help reset my head. I packed up my notes, grabbed some clean clothes, and made my way to the bathroom across the hall. Let me explain the layout of that bathroom. You walked in, and immediately on your left and right were two sets of sinks. Two on each side, big wide mirrors mounted above them, facing each other so if you looked straight on, you'd see that infinite reflection effect, mirror within mirror, stretching back endlessly. A lot of people hated that effect. It was easy to get distracted by it or creeped out. Past the sinks on the left side were two urinals and one toilet stall. On the right side were two showers. Pretty basic layout. The showers had those thin plastic stall doors, not very sturdy, but enough to give you a little privacy. The lighting was harsh fluorescent, always buzzing faintly. You could see the reflection of the shower stalls in the mirrors, depending on where you stood, especially from the right-hand set of sinks. That night, the door to the bathroom was wedged open with this thick wooden wedge. That thing didn't move easily. Someone had jammed it in pretty tight, standard practice to keep the heavy door from slamming shut. I walked in, set my change of clothes on the sink on the right side, right under the mirror, and started getting ready to shower. The place was empty, quiet. I didn't hear anyone else in the hallway either. Just me and that familiar hum of the fluorescent lights. I looked up into the mirror without thinking much about it, just checking my face, hair, whatever. But then something caught my eye in the reflection. At first, it looked like nothing, just a weird shimmer way back in the infinite mirror loop, like a ripple or something out of place. I squinted at it. It wasn't moving exactly, but it was definitely there. It looked like a dark blur or shadow. I figured it was my eyes playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired or overstimulated. I rubbed my face, blinked a few times, looked again. Still there. Only now it had moved. Not in the physical space of the room, but closer in the reflection. It had jumped forward a layer in the loop. From way back in the mirrored infinity to one step closer. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I stood there, staring at this thing, not sure if I was hallucinating or just freaking myself out. It kept moving. Each time I blinked or looked away for even a second, it would jump forward again. Closer. Clearer. I could start to make out a shape. It wasn't sharp or well-defined, but it was dark and tall. And there was something flowing from it. At first I thought it was long hair, like a curtain or strands blowing in slow motion. But the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't hair. It was like fabric. A veil, maybe. Thin in some spots, like you could almost see through it. But underneath, from the chest down, it was just pitch black. I felt this tightness in my throat, like I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt like it was locked in a vice. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs. I couldn't move. I just stood there, gripping the edge of the sink, staring into the mirror as this thing came closer, one layer at a time. And then I saw its face. I can't explain it. Not in any real way. It was human, or at least shaped like a human. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. But it wasn't right. The features were, I don't know, too far apart or too symmetrical. Too smooth. The eyes were black but not empty. There was this faint, pulsing glow from inside them. Like embers but darker. Like heat without light. The face didn't move. It didn't smile or scowl or blink. It just looked. Straight at me. And then the lights went out. Instant, absolute darkness. Not the kind you get in a room with a window where your eyes adjust. This was pure black. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. The hum of the lights was gone. The only thing I could hear was the sudden slam of the steel bathroom door behind me. It shut so hard I felt the floor vibrate. I stumbled backward, reached out blindly for the door, but it wouldn't open. I pushed, pulled, kicked. It was stuck. Or locked. Or something. The wedge that had been holding it open was gone. Just gone. I tried to stay calm, told myself maybe someone was messing with me. A prank. It had to be. But then the smell hit me. Blood. Thick and metallic and sharp. Not faint. Not subtle. It was like I had shoved my face into a bag of pennies soaked in iron. I gagged. It felt like the air was thick with it, like I could taste it. And that's the last thing I remember. I woke up in a hospital bed. The lights were bright, and everything felt too quiet. My head was pounding, and my shirt was stiff, stuck to my chest. I looked down and saw the dried blood. My nose had bled badly. The sheets were clean, though, so someone had already cleaned me up. I sat up slowly, dizzy, disoriented. A nurse walked in, saw me awake, and immediately went to get a doctor. Later, I was told my RA had found me. He'd gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and found the door shut tight. When he managed to get it open, he saw me curled up in the corner of the shower stall, shirt soaked in blood, eyes wide open but not responding. According to him, I kept whispering the same thing over and over. It saw me, over and over again, like a broken record. I didn't remember saying that. I didn't remember much of anything. Just the eyes in the mirror, and that smell. They ran tests. CT scan, MRI, full blood panel. The doctor's best guess was a seizure. But nothing showed up. No brain abnormalities, no history, no explanation. I wasn't epileptic. I'd taken Adderall before, plenty of times, never had a reaction. They kept me under observation for a couple days. My parents drove in and stayed with me, and eventually I was cleared to go home. Just a one-time incident, they said. Stress, maybe. Lack of sleep, overexertion, maybe even a panic attack. But I knew it wasn't any of those things. Since that night, I haven't been the same. I can't look in mirrors. Not for more than a few seconds. Not without feeling my heart start to race. If I'm in a room with one, even just a small one on a cabinet or hanging on a wall, I start to sweat. My hands shake. It's like I can feel it watching. Not always, but enough. I've been in therapy for 3 years now. I've talked to psychologists, neurologists, even a few spiritual advisors, priests, pastors, anyone who'd listen. Most of them just give me the usual answers. Stress response, trauma, psychosomatic fear. The spiritual ones say I need to pray, to find faith, to seek comfort in God. But none of them seem to know what it was. And I've searched. I've looked up every paranormal story I can find about mirrors, about dorms, about veils, about glowing black eyes. But nothing fits. The weirdest part, it never happened again. Not to me, not to anyone else in that dorm. I transferred the next year and never looked back. A few of my old floor mates visited after I left. They said everything was fine. No more weird feelings, no more bad vibes. It was like whatever happened was just a one-time thing. Just me. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would if I hadn't lived through it myself. I don't know what it was. A hallucination, a break from... I drove down the long country road just after sunset, the sky fading to dull shades of gray. I was alone in my old sedan, headlights cutting through the gathering gloom. The pavement was wet from earlier rain, making pulsing patches of water reflect my headlights like pale mirrors. I could hear the soft hum of the tires rolling over surface imperfections. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The road felt endless and empty, flanked by dense woods on both sides. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and pine needles. I'd been driving for hours, trying to clear my head. My mind felt heavy with stress and restless thoughts. Everything about the road seemed calm, ordinary. But as miles passed, a sense of unease began to creep over me. I saw no houses, no streetlights, just the forest and the narrow highway. I slowed down, hoping to find a town or even a farmhouse. Nothing appeared. My headlights caught occasional branches brushing the windshield when I drove close to the edge of the road. Each bump jolted me a little deeper into alertness. After what felt like 30 minutes without traffic or buildings, my gas light flickered. I glanced down and saw the warning showing low fuel. Panic mixed with irritation. I checked earlier. How could I be nearly out now? My heart began to beat faster. I had no cell signal, I realized, trying my phone again. Just an endless search icon blinking at me. I sighed. I decided to keep going, hoping a station or some light would appear soon. but the darkness pressed in around me. The trees seemed to lean closer, shadows stretching across the road. I turned on my dome light briefly, glanced over my shoulder, and shivered. No sign of life anywhere. I tried to hold it together. I told myself, just keep driving. Eventually I'd reach something. But as I passed another mile marker, just blank trees, I noticed headlights behind me. A car following at a steady distance, high beams on. A white SUV. I increased speed slightly. The headlights matched mine, bright and piercing. I thought maybe they were just another traveler. But the distance stayed constant. I started to feel watched, hunted even. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the SUV staying just behind, matching my curves, tight behind. I moved to pass slower cars, but none were on the road. Panic spiked. I didn't want confrontation, but I also didn't trust it. I slowed again, letting them pass. But the SUV didn't pass. It stayed behind me, headlights flashing occasionally. I pulled over to the shoulder. The car slowed down too, stopping perhaps 50 feet behind. I locked my doors, the engine off. I sat in total silence, watching only the SUV's headlights behind me. I heard nothing but my breath. I fingered the keys in my pocket. I waited. Minutes passed. The headlights stayed. I thought I should maybe call 911, but there's no signal. Then the SUV's headlights turned off. Darkness beyond my rear window. I dared to open the door slightly, looked back. The road was empty. My heart rattled in my chest. I slid back in, unlocked the doors, restarted the engine. I drove on. Every now and then I glanced at the mirror, but nothing. It felt hours before I saw any sign of civilization. 2 street lights, a curve, and a small building with a flickering neon open sign. Relief washed over me. I turned off the highway onto a dirt entrance. The sign swelled into view. A gas station, convenience store, maybe a small diner attached. I parked under a flickering overhead light. My hands shook as I opened the door and stepped out. The air felt warm and damp. I sniffed, relief mingled with exhaustion. The doors to the convenience store swung open gratefully. I went inside, footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. The fluorescent lighting was harsh. The clerk looked up with sleepy eyes. I paid for gas, a full tank, and some water. I stood at the pump, shaking, gas nozzle in hand. I filled the tank, tight-lipped. After finishing, I closed the hatch and walked back toward the store. I needed to call someone, but still no signal. I sighed. I took a breath. The parking lot was nearly empty, lit by only 2 poles. The pump islands cast long, eerie shadows. I felt uneasy again, like something was watching. I told myself I was exhausted and paranoid. I went inside. I grabbed a can of soda, a snack bar, and a flashlight from a shelf. They sold cheap flashlights. I paid. The clerk gave no expression. I left the store and got into my car. Before driving away, I took out the flashlight and clicked it on, beam narrow but bright enough. I looked toward the back of the station. Beyond the lights, I could see trees meeting pavement. But I noticed a figure standing just at the edge of the infrared glow of the store cameras. A man in a dark jacket, jeans. Easy to dismiss, maybe a delivery driver or a smoker. But my heart thumped. When I shone the beam toward him, he ducked behind the building. No words, no explanation. I locked my doors before getting in, then drove slowly off, keeping eyes on the building in the rearview mirror. He stayed in place. I sped up once on the highway. My headlights swept. There he was, walking out from behind the building, walking along the highway behind me, still too far but clearly following. I floored the accelerator. The speedometer jumped. I rounded a bend and lost sight of him briefly. Then he reappeared, too close to be coincidence. My stomach twisted. I passed the speed limit, then passed it again. I kept glancing at the side mirrors. He stayed at the edge of the headlights, thin figure matching my turns. Fear roared inside me. I pressed firmly on the wheel. My breathing was shallow. My mind raced. There's only 2 things to do: drive home as fast as possible or find someone. But home was miles away. I needed somewhere safe. Lights, people. I scanned ahead, a crossroads with blinking signs, turn off for a small town maybe. I made a turn onto a different road, leaving the highway. I slowed before the turnoff, breathing fast. I turned and for the first time in minutes, I didn't see him behind. No headlights. I stared into the dark. I drove into that side road at speed, heart pounding. No trace of the figure inside mirrors. My mind whirled. Did I just lose him? Could he be still behind trees? Was I safe? The side road felt more remote, but light flickered ahead. I pressed onward. Soon I saw another gas station sign, overhead lights. I pulled in. Same routine, park, go inside. This place was larger, small diner area, tables empty. Some locals played video lottery machines. I used the store phone, landline, and called my friend, telling him quickly everything. He said he'd drive out to meet me. I felt relief. I sat at a table near the window, sipping the soda I'd bought. I switched on the phone beside the landline to test signal. It had one bar now. I texted my husband, hands still trembling. Then I saw something through the window behind me, movement. I turned in the chair, flashlight from earlier resting on the table, still on. I backed away, the beam crossing the window. I saw that man again, standing near the entrance doors outside. I froze. He pressed his forehead and hands against the glass and looked in, though I couldn't see his face clearly. He stood still. Nobody else in the diner seemed to notice. My throat dry. I stood up, moved to the cashier stand where the clerk stood. I pointed at the door casually. That man. The clerk turned and looked. He frowned. The man outside frowned back, then stepped back out of immediate view. The clerk said quietly, "I don't know him. I'll lock that door." He locked it. I thanked him, feeling intense relief. My friend texted to say he was an hour out. I took a seat again. I kept looking at the door, locked, lit, secured. We waited. The man outside paced the parking lot, near the edge of the light. He shifted, stood still, bent down as if picking something, moved again. But he didn't try to open the doors. Maybe he knew they were locked. Hours felt like minutes. Finally, a car pulled in, headlights flashing. Two men jumped out. They were my friend and his co-worker. They approached cautiously. I unlocked the door from inside. They stepped in. I locked the door behind them. Tears welled. Relief crashed through every nerve. We huddled together. They assured me they'd be with me every step until home. It was early morning when we drove off. We took a main road all the way. No sign of the stalker man. At sunrise, we reached the edge of the forest. We stopped at an all-night coffee shop just outside the next town. I shivered over coffee. My voice cracked as I explained everything to him again. He looked pale. We contacted the local sheriff's office too. They said they'd drive out and check the gas station locations, the parking lots, video footage. I gave them descriptions, the times. I looked around, jittery, eyes flicked everywhere. After that, we continued home. As the sun rose fully, the road felt less threatening. I sat in the passenger seat, breathing deep, watching familiar landmarks as we approached my neighborhood. I saw my house driveway and slowed. I stepped out, trembling legs. Friends walked me inside and stayed with me. I showered, tried to rest, but sleep didn't come easily. Days passed. I heard back from the sheriff. They found security footage from the first station. A man matching my description walking around the pumps, checking my car, ducking behind buildings. They had his license plate from his SUV parked a block away. They ran a check. He had a criminal record for stalking, harassment. They tracked him down a few hours later. He was arrested outside a small apartment he rented near the highway. He had been tailing other drivers too, according to neighbors. In the end, I was